My son's Thanksgiving dinner felt warm and perfect until my phone rang with an unknown number. A panicked voice whispered, "Get back to your house tonight. Do not tell anyone." I listened to that voice. When I reached my home, what I found broke my heart and ignited a war I was more than ready to finish. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who should have loved you the most. My name is Garrett Cole. I am 69 years old, and until that Thursday evening, I believed I had fulfilled every duty a father could possibly have. The dining room in my son Derek's upscale suburban house smelled of roasted turkey, expensive sage stuffing, and an overwhelming amount of hypocrisy. I sat at the end of the long table watching the people I called family put on a theatrical performance of gratitude. Megan, my 34-year-old daughter-in-law, poured me yet another glass of heavy bourbon. It was her fourth attempt to keep me glued to that velvet dining chair. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, assessing me the way a hawk assesses a wounded rabbit. "Garrett, you absolutely must stay for the pumpkin pie," Megan insisted, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she always used when she wanted something. "Besides, you should not be driving back to that huge, empty house all alone. Have another drink. Relax. We worry about your mind, Garrett. You seem so forgetful and fragile lately." I had never forgotten a single thing in my life, let alone the condescension in her voice. I looked at my son. Derek was 38 years old, a ruthless corporate sales director who managed dozens of employees. Yet in his own dining room, he shrank into a silent, spineless shadow whenever his white wife spoke. He focused intensely on slicing the turkey, deliberately avoiding my gaze. He knew Megan was insulting me, building a narrative of my supposed senility right to my face, but he lacked the courage to defend the father who had sacrificed everything to put him through college. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every comment Megan made was a thinly veiled insult wrapped in false concern. She worked in the credit department of a major bank, and her entire worldview revolved around numbers, assets, and leverage. To her, I was not a father-in-law. I was a ticking clock attached to a piece of prime real estate. I took a slow sip of my water, ignoring the bourbon entirely. I was about to politely excuse myself when my phone vibrated intensely in my coat pocket. It was an unknown number. I stood up, offering a tight smile. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, walking toward the hallway and entirely ignoring Megan's sharp exhale of annoyance. I answered the phone, expecting a holiday telemarketer. Instead, a young, terrified male voice spoke rapidly, his breath hitching with anxiety. "Mr. Cole, you do not know me, but my name is Toby. I work with Megan at the bank. You need to get back to your house tonight, right now. Do not tell them you are leaving. Do not ask questions. Just drive." Before I could utter a single word, the line went dead. The silence on the other end was deafening. A cold dread settled deep in my chest, but I did not panic. When you have lived as long as I have, you learn to recognize the exact moment the ground shifts beneath your feet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my mind racing. I walked back into the dining room, grabbed my heavy wool coat from the back of the chair, and looked directly at Derek. "I am leaving," I stated, my voice low and carrying an absolute authority that left no room for negotiation. Megan stood up so fast her chair violently scraped the pristine hardwood floor. "Garrett, do not be ridiculous," she snapped, abandoning her sweet facade. "You cannot drive. You have had way too much to drink. It is not safe." She stepped directly into my path, her blue eyes wide with a sudden frantic urgency that confirmed Toby's warning. I had barely touched my drink, and she knew it perfectly well. "Move, Megan," I said calmly, looking right through her. Derek finally found his voice, stammering and nervously wiping his hands on a napkin. "Mom would have wanted us to stay together tonight, Dad. Please just sit down. Mentioning my late wife Evelyn was a fatal mistake. Your mother would have hated this dry turkey and this forced conversation," I replied coldly. I stepped past Megan, walked out the front door, and got into my car without looking back. The drive back to my neighborhood usually took about 20 minutes. The streets were quiet, peacefully lit by street lamps and the warm glow of autumn decorations on the neighbors' porches. The crisp November air biting at my windows did nothing to cool the rising heat in my veins. My mind replayed every suspicious moment over the past few months. Megan constantly asking about the deed to my house. Derek subtly suggesting I should look into assisted living facilities because the stairs were getting too dangerous. The sudden intense interest in my financial well-being from a son who had not remembered my birthday for 3 consecutive years. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. Toby's panicked voice echoed in my ears. Do not ask questions. Just drive. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so grotesque I almost refused to look at it. But as I turned the final corner onto my street, my heart stopped completely. A massive unmarked white moving truck was backed up right onto my front lawn. Its heavy, muddy tires were mercilessly crushing the delicate rose bushes Evelyn had planted with her own hands 15 years ago, grinding the vibrant petals into the freezing dirt. The front door of my house, a solid oak door that I had spent an entire weekend installing myself to keep my family safe, was splintered around the lock and hanging wide open on broken hinges. The lights inside were blazing, casting long, frantic shadows across the lawn. Strangers, at least 6 men in dark blue work uniforms, were swarming my property like locusts, carrying out my entire life. I watched in absolute horror as 2 men dragged my antique mahogany dining table down the porch steps, scraping the wood against the brick. Another was hauling heavy cardboard boxes overflowing with our most personal belongings. Evelyn's carefully curated vintage records, my favorite books, the photo albums documenting 40 years of our family history, tossing them carelessly into the cavernous back of the truck in the dead of night. I killed the engine and stepped out of the car, feeling a rage so deep and primal that it temporarily paralyzed my lungs. This was not just a house to me. When Evelyn and I bought this property over 30 years ago, we were the first African-American family in this neighborhood. We endured the suspicious stares, the whispering behind closed blinds, and the blatant hostility of people who thought we did not belong. We worked double shifts, me fixing plumbing across the city until my hands bled, and Evelyn teaching elementary school until her voice went hoarse, just to prove we had every right to be there. Every brick, every floorboard, every piece of furniture in that house was paid for with our blood, our sweat, and our undeniable dignity. It was our fortress. It was the legacy we had built against all odds. And now my own flesh and blood, the son I had given everything to, had sent strangers to pillage it like common thieves in the night. I did not yell. I did not scream for the police. I walked slowly up my driveway, the gravel crunching under my shoes. My hands were clenched into tight fists inside my coat pockets, my mind calculating every single step of the war I was about to wage. A burly man with a thick beard and a heavy clipboard emerged from my front hallway, barking orders at the movers to hurry up. He saw me approaching and stopped, casually wiping sweat from his forehead. He did not look guilty. He did not look like a criminal caught red-handed in the middle of a burglary. He looked entirely annoyed by my presence. He walked down the porch steps, stepping right over a shattered piece of my front door frame, and approached me with an air of absolute confidence. "You must be Garrett," he said, his tone dismissive and flat. He did not offer an apology. Instead, he reached into his heavy jacket, pulled out a folded, officially stamped legal document, and shoved it directly toward my chest. I took the heavy parchment paper from his calloused hand, holding it up to the harsh yellow glare of the truck headlights. The bold black letters at the top of the page seemed to vibrate in the freezing autumn air. Medical and financial power of attorney. I skimmed the dense legal jargon, my eyes scanning past the clauses granting absolute control over my property, my medical decisions, and my financial assets to Derek Cole and Megan Cole. But it was the bottom of the second page that made my blood run entirely cold. There, stark and undeniably authentic, was my own signature. I stared at the ink, my mind racing backward through time, searching for the exact moment I had signed my life away. Then the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 3 months ago, I was in the hospital for a minor routine surgery on my knee. I was groggy from the anesthesia, fighting a dull ache in my leg when Megan visited my room. She brought me a thick stack of what she claimed were standard hospital discharge forms and insurance waivers. She had smiled that same calculating, sweet smile, handing me a pen and pointing exactly where to sign to speed up the process so I could go home and rest. I trusted my son's wife. I signed the papers without putting on my reading glasses. She had buried this power of attorney right in the middle of that stack, using my drug-induced haze to steal my independence. The foreman crossed his arms over his chest, his breath turning to white steam in the night air. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "I do not care about family drama. Your son and his wife hired my company this morning. They showed us the notarized paperwork. They told us you were being moved to an assisted living facility tonight due to severe cognitive decline, and they needed the house cleared for an immediate staging and sale. If you have a problem, take it up with them. We are just doing our job." He turned his back on me and shouted at 2 men carrying out my vintage leather armchair. I looked at the document again. It was notarized. Megan worked in the credit department of a major bank. She had access to in-house notaries, people who would stamp a document without asking questions if a senior colleague asked for a quick favor. The trap had been set perfectly. If I called the police right now, the officers would arrive, look at a legally binding notarized document, and look at an angry, distressed 69-year-old black man making wild accusations against his successful son. Megan would play the victim. She would show them this piece of paper, claim I was having a violent dementia episode, and they would likely drag me away for a mandatory psychiatric hold. That was exactly what she wanted. I would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I did not scream. I did not curse. I carefully folded the document, slipped it into my coat pocket, and backed away from my own front yard. Every step felt like retreating from a battlefield where I had been ambushed without a weapon. I got back into my car and locked the doors, shielding myself from the freezing wind and the sight of my life being dismantled piece by piece. Sitting in the driver's seat, my mind shifted from the shock of the betrayal to the cold, hard logistics of survival. If Megan had the legal authority to empty my house, she had the legal authority to empty my bank accounts. She was a banker. She understood leverage, and she would know that stripping me of my cash was the fastest way to ensure my complete submission. I pulled out my phone and quickly dialed the 24-hour customer service line for the bank that held my pension and everyday checking account. The automated voice guided me through the prompts. I typed in my account number and my social security number, my fingers moving rapidly over the glowing screen. The line clicked and a human operator answered. Her voice was polite and strictly professional. "Mr. Cole, how can I assist you tonight?" "I need to put an immediate freeze on all my accounts," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level, betraying none of the panic that was threatening to consume me. "I believe my financial information has been compromised." "Please hold for one moment while I pull up your profile," she replied. The hold music played for 30 agonizing seconds. When she returned, her tone had noticeably shifted. It was no longer accommodating, it was guarded. "I am sorry, Mr. Cole, but I am looking at your account right now, and it appears a complete freeze was already initiated this afternoon." "By whom?" I demanded, the grip on my phone tightening until the plastic creaked. "By your legally appointed financial guardian," the operator stated firmly. "Megan Cole submitted a notarized power of attorney to our branch manager at 3 o'clock today. According to the notes on your file, your access has been revoked due to medical reasons, and all funds have been routed to a secure holding account under her direct management. Because she is a verified banking official, the transfer was expedited. I cannot authorize any transactions or grant you access without her explicit written consent." She had locked me out. Using her corporate credentials and the stolen signature, Megan had severed my lifeline. The pension I had earned over 40 grueling years of labor, the savings I used to pay for my groceries and electricity, it was all gone. She had executed a flawless financial execution while serving me roasted turkey and smiling in my face. I thanked the operator and ended the call. The silence inside my car was heavy and absolute. I was officially a ghost in my own life. I stared through the windshield at the massive moving truck, watching my son's hired hands carry away Evelyn's antique cedar chest. Seeing it violated like that brought a bitter memory of Derek to the surface. Even as a young boy, Derek possessed an insatiable, bottomless greed. Evelyn used to say he had a hole in his soul that no amount of allowance or new toys could ever fill. Whenever we bought him something, he never appreciated it. He only looked at what the neighbor kids had and complained that it was not enough. I spent my life trying to teach him the value of hard work, trying to show him that respect was earned, not demanded. But he always preferred the easy way out. He wanted the corner office without putting in the hours. He wanted the luxury lifestyle without the sweat. And when he married Megan, a woman whose entire existence was defined by price tags and profit margins, that childhood greed mutated into something truly monstrous. Together, they had decided my life was worth more to them liquidated. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my leather wallet. I opened it under the dim dome light of the car. I had exactly $42 in cash. My credit cards were useless pieces of plastic. My home, the fortress I had built with my bare hands, was being stripped down to the studs by strangers. I had no access to my pension. The temperature outside was plummeting below freezing, and the biting wind howled against the car windows. I was a 69-year-old man, completely erased from the system, left sitting in the freezing cold with nowhere to sleep and no one to call. But as I turned the ignition key to start the heater, a slow, dangerous clarity washed over me. They thought I was just a retired plumber with a nice house and a modest pension. They thought they had taken everything. They had absolutely no idea who they were really dealing with. I drove away from this neighborhood that had been my sanctuary for 3 decades. The streets were slick with frost matching the icy resolve settling over my mind. With only $42 to my name, my options were severely limited. I navigated toward the industrial outskirts of the city, pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a rundown highway motel. A flickering neon vacancy sign buzzed overhead like a dying insect. I paid the night clerk $35 in cash for a room that smelled of stale smoke and damp carpet. Sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, still wearing my heavy wool coat because the room heater was broken, my phone vibrated against the cheap laminate nightstand. The caller ID flashed Derek's name. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing before answering. "Dad, where are you?" Derek's voice flooded the speaker, laced with a frantic, exaggerated concern that turned my stomach. "You left the house so abruptly. Megan is absolutely terrified you got lost on the way home. We have been worried sick." I closed my eyes. The performance was sickeningly transparent. He was not calling out of genuine fear for my safety. He was calling to establish a timeline. He wanted me to sound disoriented on a recorded line, or better yet, to admit I was wandering aimlessly. It was all part of their carefully orchestrated narrative to legally cement my supposed dementia. They needed a record of me acting erratically to justify the moving truck currently emptying my house and the forged power of attorney. "I am perfectly fine, son," I replied, my voice steady, betraying zero emotion. I just felt incredibly tired after the heavy meal. I did not want to risk falling asleep at the wheel, so I checked into a motel off the highway to rest for the night. I will head home in the morning. There was a slight pause on his end. He was surprised by my clarity. A motel dad, that is exactly why Megan was saying, "You need supervision. You should not be staying in strange places. Just tell me where you are, and I will come pick you up right now. We can go to your house and get you settled." He wanted to know if I had been to the house yet. He was fishing to see if the element of surprise had been ruined. I smiled into the dark, empty room. "Do not worry about me, Derek. Get some sleep. Tell Megan I appreciate her concern." I hung up the phone and set it face down. They thought they had backed a frail old man into a corner. They had no idea they had just handed me the element of surprise. Morning broke with a harsh gray light filtering through the dirty motel blinds. I washed my face in the rusted sink, buttoned my coat, and left my remaining $7 on the nightstand as a tip for the housekeeper. I had no time to waste on phone operators hiding behind corporate scripts. I drove directly to the main branch of my local bank, the place where I had deposited my plumbing checks for over 30 years. I walked through the polished glass doors with my head held high, ignoring the exhaustion aching in my bones. I bypassed the tellers and walked straight to the glass-walled office of the branch manager, a man named Richard, whom I had known for nearly a decade. Richard looked up from his computer, his face instantly dropping into an expression of profound discomfort when he saw me standing in his doorway. "Mr. Cole," he stammered, standing up awkwardly. "Please come in, have a seat." I remained standing. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice low but sharp enough to cut glass, "I want a physical printout of my account activities from the last 24 hours. I was told last night that my accounts were frozen by my daughter-in-law. I need to know exactly what she did." Richard swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. He nervously clicked his mouse, bringing up my profile. "Mr. Cole, my hands are legally tied. Megan submitted a notarized financial guardianship order yesterday afternoon. Because she is a senior credit officer at our partner institution across town, her credentials allowed her to bypass the standard 72-hour review period for power of attorney documents. She flagged your account for emergency medical intervention." I leaned over his desk, planting my hands firmly on the polished wood. "Did she just freeze the funds, Richard? Or did she move them?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the closed door of his office. "She executed an expedited wire transfer at 8 o'clock this morning just as the banking window opened. She utilized an internal institutional override code to clear the fraud alerts. Mr. Cole, she completely drained the liquid assets. All $60,000 of your retirement savings were transferred into an external holding account registered under her name. There is nothing left in your primary accounts but the minimum maintenance balance." The sheer audacity of the theft hit me like a physical strike. She had not just locked me out of my money to control me. She had stolen the cash outright. $60,000 was not a fortune to a Wall Street executive, but to a retired plumber it was a lifeline. It was the money I used to pay for my property taxes, my groceries, and my utilities. By moving it instantly using her white-collar banking clearance, she ensured I could not hire a lawyer, rent an apartment, or even buy a warm meal. She had executed a flawless financial assassination using the very banking protocols designed to protect seniors from fraud to commit the ultimate robbery. I walked out of the bank and stepped into the freezing morning air, my breath turning to vapor. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. Megan's strategy was brilliantly evil. She had weaponized her corporate job against me. She knew the loopholes, the override codes, and the bureaucratic red tape. She assumed that because I was a blue-collar worker who spent his life fixing pipes and crawling under houses, I would be financially illiterate and utterly helpless against institutional theft. She thought my entire net worth was contained in that single $60,000 checking account and the brick house she was currently trying to sell. But Megan and Derek did not understand the philosophy Evelyn and I had lived by our entire marriage. We believed in invisible wealth. We knew that flashy cars and bloated bank accounts only attracted predators. We had deliberately kept my primary checking account modest. The $60,000 Megan just stole was nothing but surface money. It was the decoy. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I bypassed my usual contacts, scrolling past the numbers for my doctor, my neighbors, and my treacherous son. I navigated to a hidden encrypted application I had not opened in over 5 years. I dialed a private number. The phone rang only twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Robert Pierce. Law firm, the voice stated. Robert, I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. It is Garrett Cole. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of a heavy pen dropping onto a desk. Garrett, it has been a long time. Tell me who I need to destroy. My son and his wife just stole my Surface accounts and tried to sell my house out from under me. I replied, my voice steady and cold as steel. It is time to wake up the Ghost Trust. I need you to crush them. I drove straight to the financial district, navigating the labyrinth of towering steel and glass until I reached the skyscraper that housed Robert Pierce's law firm. Robert was not just a lawyer. He was a corporate shark, a man whose entire career was built on dismembering hostile takeovers and burying financial predators. When Evelyn and I liquidated our assets years ago, Robert was the architect who constructed the impenetrable legal fortress around our real wealth. He was waiting for me in his corner office, a sprawling, immaculate room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freezing city. He did not offer empty condolences or patronizing pity when I walked through the door. Instead, he slid a thick black leather folder across his polished mahogany desk the moment I sat down. I put my investigative team on your son and daughter-in-law the second we hung up, Robert stated, leaning back in his leather chair, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. It did not take long to find the rot beneath the floorboards. They are bleeding out, Garrett. The luxurious lifestyle, the imported luxury cars, the sprawling suburban house where you had dinner last night, it is all a fragile house of cards built on suffocating, inescapable debt. I opened the folder, my hands steady. The numbers printed on the crisp white pages were staggering. How bad is the damage? I asked, my voice betraying no emotion. Robert tapped a heavy silver pen against the desk. They are $400,000 in the hole. Megan has completely maxed out 6 different premium credit cards, desperately moving balances around to avoid defaults. Derek took out a massive second mortgage on their home a year ago to fund an ill-advised tech startup investment that completely tanked. They are now 3 months behind on their primary mortgage payments. The bank is preparing to initiate aggressive foreclosure proceedings by the end of December. That is exactly why they are moving with such reckless criminal speed. They do not just want your money for a vacation. They absolutely need the cash from the immediate sale of your house to save themselves from total bankruptcy before Christmas. The sheer pathetic reality of my son's existence lay bare before me. He had traded his soul, his father, and his family legacy just to keep up appearances for a wife who viewed him as nothing more than a failing investment. They had literally sold my dignity and my home to pay for their designer clothes and disastrous financial ventures. Megan was using her position at the bank to project an image of pristine wealth while secretly drowning in a sea of red ink. We have enough hard evidence to go to the authorities right now, Robert said, leaning forward, his tone turning lethal. Megan committed federal wire fraud by bypassing banking protocols to drain your $60,000. We can file an emergency legal injunction, freeze her accounts, and have them both arrested for elder financial abuse by nightfall. Let me unleash the hounds, Garrett. I will ruin them so thoroughly they will never secure a bank loan or a corporate job again. I stared at the damning financial documents, tracing the sharp edge of the paper with my thumb. No. I replied, my voice steady and cold as the winter wind outside. We are not going to the police. Not yet. Robert frowned, clearly frustrated by my restraint. Garrett, they are currently stripping your home to the studs. If we do not file an emergency injunction today, that house goes on the open market tomorrow morning. If we file an injunction, I countered, looking directly into Robert's eyes, Megan will play her trump card. She has a medical power of attorney. She works in the financial sector and knows exactly how to manipulate the legal and medical systems. If I walk into a courtroom tomorrow claiming my son and his wife are stealing from me, Megan will immediately produce a corrupt psychiatrist she has inevitably paid off. She will point to my anger and claim I am experiencing severe paranoia and violent dementia. They will place me under an involuntary psychiatric hold. I will be locked in a sterile white room, heavily medicated and silenced while you spend months fighting a corrupted legal battle. By the time I finally get out, the house will be sold, the money will be laundered through offshore accounts, and the damage will be irreversible. Robert slowly lowered his pen, understanding the grim tactical reality of my words. She is banking on your predictable outrage, he noted. She expects you to fight back openly and aggressively so she can trap you in a medical straitjacket. Exactly, I said. So we do not fight back openly. We let them think they have won. We let them believe I am exactly what they think I am, a broken, helpless old man who has surrendered to his tragic fate. But in the shadows, Robert, I want you to start quietly buying up their debt. Contact the predatory lenders they owe money to. Do not let them know who is acquiring their loans. I want to become their absolute financial master. I will cut their oxygen supply off so silently they will not even realize they are suffocating until their lungs are burning. I choose financial sabotage. Robert allowed a rare, dangerous smile to cross his stoic face. Evelyn always said you were the most terrifyingly patient man she ever met. He closed the black folder with a definitive snap. I will initiate the ghost trust. Evelyn and I had never cared for the spotlight or the validation of strangers. When my plumbing business expanded decades ago, we secretly invested every spare dollar into buying rundown, bankrupt gas stations across the state. We renovated them, made them highly profitable, and sold the entire regional chain to a massive national conglomerate 10 years ago. We deposited $8 million into a blind trust that did not show up on any standard background check, tax return, or credit report. We drove older model cars and lived in the same modest brick house because we understood the fundamental truth of the world. Flashy wealth makes you a visible target, but invisible wealth makes you completely invincible. Megan and Derek thought they were playing a game of chess against an ignorant peasant. They had absolutely no idea they had just declared war on a king with unlimited resources. I left Robert's office with my heart fortified by ice and a clear, devastating plan forming in my mind. I stopped at a cheap discount store on the edge of town, buying a battered, inexpensive suitcase and filling it with a few basic changes of clothes. I sat in my car for a moment, ruffling my hair to make it look unkempt, letting my shoulders sag, and practicing the trembling, defeated look of an elderly man who had lost everything he held dear. I had to bury my pride to secure my ultimate victory. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, freezing shadows across the manicured lawns of suburbia, I drove my car back to Derek's upscale neighborhood. I parked 2 blocks away to conceal my vehicle, grabbed my single pathetic suitcase, and walked slowly up his winding concrete driveway. My heart was not beating with fear or sadness. It was beating with the methodical, calculated rhythm of a predator closing in on its prey. I dragged my feet up the porch steps, raised my hand, and knocked softly on the heavy oak door, ready to walk straight into the lion's den. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing Derek bathed in the warm, golden light of the foyer. When his eyes landed on me standing on his porch with my shoulders slumped and a battered suitcase in my trembling hand, all the color drained from his face. I widened my eyes, forcing a look of utter bewilderment and vulnerability. I let my jaw go slack and made my hands shake violently against the freezing wind. "Derek," I rasped, pitching my voice to sound thin and terrified. "I went home, but there were strangers there. My house was empty. I do not know where my keys are. I did not know where else to go." Derek swallowed hard. Guilt flashed across his features, followed immediately by sheer panic. He looked over his shoulder. "Dad, Before he could formulate a pathetic excuse, Megan appeared in the hallway, clutching a crystal glass of white wine. Her sharp blue eyes narrowed the second she saw me. There was no sympathy in her gaze, only a profound, visceral disgust. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray dog tracking mud onto a pristine white rug. She marched to the door and pulled Derek aside, hissing in a harsh whisper that was loud enough for me to hear. "What is he doing here? I thought you said the facility would pick him up in the morning. He looks completely lost." "Megan," Derek whispered back, his voice trembling. "We cannot just leave him on the porch in the freezing cold. The neighbors will see." Megan sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes as if burdened by the greatest inconvenience in the world. She stepped forward and put on her sickeningly sweet, patronizing voice. "Oh, Garrett, you poor thing. Your memory must be playing tricks on you again. We are selling that big, drafty old house for your own good. Come inside before you catch pneumonia." I shuffled across the threshold, dragging my feet, leaning heavily on the doorframe. I expected to be led to one of their 3 immaculate guest bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Instead, Megan marched past the grand staircase and opened a narrow, reinforced door near the kitchen pantry. "The guest rooms are currently being renovated," she lied smoothly, not even bothering to sound convincing. "You will have to stay down here for the night. It is safer anyway. No stairs for you to fall down." She flipped a switch. A single flickering bare bulb illuminated an unfinished, windowless basement. The air was thick with dampness and the sharp smell of mildew. The concrete floor was freezing, and the only piece of furniture was a rusty metal folding cot with a thin, stained mattress pushed against the far wall. It was a space meant for discarded boxes, not a human being. It was a holding cell. Derek stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the miserable cot. He opened his mouth, perhaps to object, but Megan shot him a single icy glare, and he instantly looked away, staring at his expensive leather shoes. "Get some sleep, Garrett," Megan said cheerfully. "We will sort out your permanent facility tomorrow." She slammed the door shut, plunging me into the damp, isolating silence. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place from the outside. She had literally locked me in the basement. I stood in the center of the cold concrete floor, letting the shivering act drop entirely. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders to release the tension of the performance. They thought they had trapped me. They did not realize I had just successfully breached their perimeter. I waited 3 hours in absolute silence. I sat on the edge of the miserable cot, listening to the muffled footsteps above me until the house settled into the deep, heavy quiet of the dead of night. At 2 in the morning, I stood up. I reached into my cheap suitcase and pulled out a small, specialized leather pouch provided by Robert's security team earlier that afternoon. Inside was a state-of-the-art micro-audio transmitter no larger than a standard coin, capable of broadcasting crystal-clear audio directly to an encrypted application on my phone. Using a thin piece of wire I had extracted from the cot's springs, I skillfully picked the cheap deadbolt on the basement door in under 30 seconds. Decades of working as a plumber had taught me how to navigate the intricate mechanics of old locks. I slipped out of the basement and moved through their dark, sprawling house with the silent, predatory grace of a phantom. I bypassed the squeaking floorboards in the hallway and entered their formal dining room. I knew from Robert's dossier that Megan conducted her most sensitive, off-the-books business calls from the head of this massive mahogany table early in the morning before Derek woke up. I crawled underneath the table, securely fastening the adhesive side of the micro-recorder deep within the wooden grooves where no one would ever feel or see it. I slipped back into the basement and locked the door behind me, settling in to wait. The payoff came faster than I expected. At 6 in the morning, my phone vibrated in the dark. I put in my wireless earpiece and activated the listening app. Megan's sharp, impatient voice came through with perfect clarity. She was on a phone call. "Vince, I do not care what the standard market rate is," Megan hissed. "I need this property liquidated immediately. No inspections, no bank appraisals, no traditional listings. I want an all-cash buyer, and I want the closing finalized by the end of next week." A man's voice, raspy and arrogant, responded on speakerphone. "A 7-day cash close on a property that size. That is going to require finding someone who asks 0 questions, Megan. My buyers are going to want a severe discount, and I am going to want a massive cut for expediting a shady deal. 40% below market value minimum." "Fine," Megan snapped without hesitation. "Take whatever cut you want from the buyer's end. Just get me $300,000 in clean, untraceable cash wired to the offshore account I sent you. My father-in-law's signature is already on the power of attorney. The old fool does not even know what day it is. Just get it done before the bank auditors flag my personal mortgage defaults." I recorded every single second of the audio directly to my secure cloud server. She was conspiring to commit real estate fraud intentionally, selling a highly valuable asset far below market value to dodge federal banking oversight and funnel the cash into an offshore account to save her own skin. She was leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs that would guarantee her a lengthy federal prison sentence. As the call ended, I heard a second set of footsteps enter the dining room above me. It was Derek. His voice came through the earpiece, sounding weak and hesitant. "Megan, are you sure about Vince?" Derek asked softly. "Selling Dad's house for cash under the table feels risky. If the bank finds out or if Dad somehow figures it out." "Your dad is sitting in a freezing basement talking to the walls," Megan interrupted viciously. "And if you want to keep your imported car and your country club membership, you will shut your mouth and let me handle the adults' work. If we do not get this cash by Friday, we are homeless, Derek. Do you understand?" "Yes, Megan. I understand," Derek murmured, utterly defeated. Listening to that exchange, the final agonizing thread of paternal sympathy inside me completely snapped. I realized my son was not a victim of manipulation. He was a willing, cowardly accomplice. He had traded his father's life for his wife's approval. He was beyond saving, and I no longer had any desire to save him. I needed to gather more intelligence on where Megan was keeping her physical banking ledgers. I waited until I heard Derek leave for work and Megan head upstairs to shower. I picked the basement lock again and quietly made my way to the first floor. I adopted my hunched, confused posture just in case and wandered toward Megan's home office. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and saw a stack of past-due mortgage notices and legal banking documents spread across her pristine glass desk. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the devastating proof of their financial ruin. Suddenly, the hardwood floor creaked behind me. "What exactly do you think you are looking at?" Megan's voice cut through the silence like a cracking whip, freezing the blood in my veins. I froze, keeping my back to her for a split second to compose my features. I forced my shoulders to slump, letting my hands shake as I slowly turned around. I stared at her with wide, vacant eyes, adopting the exact persona she expected. "I was just looking for the bathroom," I mumbled, pitching my voice to sound raspy and disoriented. "The hallway is so dark, I got confused." Megan did not lower her guard. She stepped fully into the home office, her eyes darting from my face to the stack of past-due mortgage notices lying completely exposed on her desk. She was a predator, and she knew the scent of danger. She stepped closer, her gaze turning utterly lethal as she studied my posture. "You are not confused, Garrett," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I see it in your eyes. You know exactly what you are looking at." I maintained my blank expression, but my silence was all the confirmation she needed. Panic, sharp and sudden, flared across her immaculate features. If I was lucid, if I understood the depth of their financial ruin, I could ruin her impending illegal cash sale. I could walk out the front door, hail a cab to the police station, and report her for elder abuse and wire fraud. She needed me neutralized immediately, and she needed it done with unquestionable legal permanence. I watched the gears turning in her calculating mind. She looked at the heavy glass door of the office, then back at me. Finally, her eyes landed on a sleek silver letter opener resting next to her keyboard. What happened next occurred with such blinding, psychotic speed that it took all my willpower not to react. Megan grabbed the heavy silver blade. She looked me dead in the eye, flashing a twisted, desperate smile. Then, without a single moment of hesitation, she dragged the sharp edge of the letter opener violently across her own left forearm. Blood welled up instantly, bright red and startling against her pale skin. It dripped down her wrist, staining the cuff of her expensive white silk blouse. She tossed the bloodied letter opener onto the floor directly at my feet. I stood perfectly still. I knew exactly what she was doing, and I knew that if I moved to stop her, or if I picked up that blade, my fingerprints would seal my fate. She grabbed her cell phone with her uninjured hand and dialed 911. The moment the operator answered, Megan transformed. The cold, calculating banker vanished, replaced instantly by a hysterical, terrified victim. "Help me!" she screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with manufactured terror. "Please send the police immediately. My father-in-law has severe dementia. He is having a violent episode. He broke into my office and attacked me with a knife. He does not know who I am. Please, there is so much blood. Hurry." She dropped the phone, letting it clatter onto the glass desk so the operator could hear her continuing to sob loudly. She sank to the floor, clutching her bleeding arm, rocking back and forth. "You are going to be locked in a padded room until the day you die, old man," she whispered viciously through her fake tears. I did not say a word. I simply recorded the sheer depravity of the moment in my mind. 10 minutes later, the wail of police sirens shattered the quiet morning air of the upscale neighborhood. Tires screeched in the driveway. Heavy boots pounded against the front porch. The front door was thrown open and 3 police officers burst into the hallway with their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Derek arrived just seconds behind them, sprinting through the front door in his tailored work suit, having clearly been called by his frantic wife. He stopped dead in his tracks at the entrance of the home office. The scene was perfectly staged for my destruction. Megan was curled in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her bleeding arm. I was standing in the center of the room, looking down at the bloody letter opener at my feet. "Secure the suspect," the lead officer barked. Two younger officers rushed forward, grabbing my arms and twisting them behind my back. They did not care that I was a 69-year-old man. They only saw a violent aggressor standing over a bleeding woman. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, clicking tightly into place. "Oh my God, Megan," Derek yelled, rushing to his wife and dropping to his knees. "What happened?" "He attacked me!" "Derek," Megan wailed, burying her face in his chest. "He came into the office muttering nonsense. He did not recognize me. He grabbed the letter opener and just started swinging. I was so terrified." The lead officer pulled out a notepad, turning his stern gaze to my son. "Sir, does your father suffer from cognitive decline? Does he have a history of violent outbursts?" I looked directly at Derek. I locked eyes with the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy I had stayed up all night helping with math homework, the boy whose entire life was funded by the sweat off my brow. This was his moment. He knew his wife was a manipulator. He knew I had never been violent a single day in my life. He looked at Megan's bleeding arm, then he looked at the police officers, and finally he looked at me. "Yes," Derek said, his voice shaking but his words devastatingly clear. "He has been suffering from severe dementia. He has been totally confused lately. We were trying to find him a safe medical facility. He must have completely lost his mind. He verbally signed my death warrant. He chose his wife's psychotic lie over his father's freedom." The officer nodded, scribbling in his notepad. "Based on the physical evidence and your statement, sir, we are removing him from the premises immediately. Given the domestic violence claim and the danger he poses, an emergency temporary restraining order is taking effect right now. He is legally barred from this property, from contacting your wife, and from coming within 500 feet of you both." They hauled me out of the home office. I walked with my head held high, refusing to stumble, refusing to give Megan the satisfaction of seeing me break. As the officers marched me through the front door and down the driveway toward the flashing lights of the police cruiser, I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew the micro recorder was still firmly planted under their dining room table, silently capturing every move they made. The officers drove me to the local precinct. Because of my age, my clean record, and the lack of a prior psychiatric history, the precinct captain decided not to formally book me into a holding cell. Instead, I was processed, handed a copy of the emergency restraining order, and forcefully instructed never to return to my son's address. They dumped my cheap suitcase on the sidewalk outside the station and told me to move along. I stood alone on the freezing pavement outside the police precinct. The bitter winter wind whipped against my coat. The physical cold was nothing compared to the absolute hollow void in my chest. The bond between a father and his son is supposed to be sacred. It is supposed to be the one anchor in a chaotic world. But standing on that concrete, I felt that anchor shatter completely. Derek had chosen his path. He had watched them put me in handcuffs based on a manufactured lie, and he had helped them tighten the metal. A single hot tear escaped my eye and rolled down my weathered cheek. It was not a tear of self-pity. It was a tear for Evelyn. It was a tear mourning the death of the boy we had loved, acknowledging that the son we raised was officially gone. I reached up and wiped the moisture from my face. That was the last tear I would ever shed for Derek Cole. The mourning period was over. I picked up my cheap suitcase and walked 3 blocks to a commercial parking garage where I had stashed my car the night before. I unlocked the door, sat in the driver's seat, and turned on the engine to let the heater thaw my frozen hands. The time for playing the helpless victim had expired. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my leather wallet. I bypassed the empty slots where my stolen credit cards used to reside. I slipped my fingernail into a hidden reinforced seam at the very back of the billfold. I pulled out a heavy matte black metal bank card. It bore no corporate logo, no bank name, and no flashy numbers. It just had a secure gold chip and my name printed in sleek, minimalist silver letters. It was the master key to the Ghost Trust. It was an instrument of absolute financial annihilation, and I had not used it in over a decade. I stared at the heavy metal in my hand, feeling the immense crushing power it represented. Megan wanted to destroy my life with a piece of paper. I was going to erase her entire existence with a piece of metal. I slid the matte black metal card back into my wallet and put the car in gear. I drove away from the police precinct, leaving the humiliation of the morning behind me. My destination was not a standard retail bank with drive-through windows and cheerful tellers handing out promotional items. I navigated to the financial center of the city, pulling up to an imposing, unmarked limestone building that occupied an entire city block. There were no glowing neon signs. There was only a discreet brass plaque beside heavy, reinforced glass doors. This was Vanguard Private Wealth Management, an institution that did not accept walk-in customers. You did not simply open an account here. You had to be invited by the board of directors, and the minimum deposit to even walk through the door was $5 million in liquid assets. I parked my car down the street and walked up to the entrance. Two towering security guards in tailored dark suits evaluated my scuffed boots and faded wool coat. I saw the immediate dismissal in their eyes. They stepped forward to block my path, assuming I was a confused old man who had wandered away from a public bus stop. I did not speak a single word. I simply reached into my pocket and held up the black metal card. The guards froze in their tracks. Their posture instantly shifted from intimidation to absolute deference. They stepped aside and quickly pulled open the heavy glass doors for me. Inside the lobby was a sanctuary of hushed whispers, polished marble floors, and dark walnut paneling. A sharply dressed executive director approached me immediately. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole," he said, his voice dropping to a respectful murmur. "It has been quite some time. We have your private suite prepared." He escorted me into a soundproof, windowless room deep within the building. He handed me an encrypted tablet and left me completely alone. I entered my biometric data and typed in the complex alphanumeric passcode Evelyn and I had memorized over a decade ago. The screen loaded, displaying the current balance of the Ghost Trust. $8,412,000. I stared at the staggering number, feeling the ghost of my wife standing beside me in that quiet room. We had not inherited this massive fortune. We built it from the dirt up, decades ago, while everyone else was trying to buy flashy suburban houses and expensive cars on credit. Evelyn and I secretly purchased a string of bankrupt, run-down gas stations along emerging commercial highways. We renovated them, worked 20-hour days, and eventually sold the entire highly profitable chain to a national conglomerate. We took that massive cash payout and buried it in this blind trust. We chose to live like modest working-class people because we understood that true financial power is completely invisible. Now that invisible power was fully awake and ready to strike with devastating force. I tapped the screen, authorizing an immediate transfer of $250,000 into a newly created, untraceable corporate checking account. I walked out of the bank feeling a profound sense of lethal calm. I drove straight to the towering glass skyscraper where my lawyer Robert Pierce operated. I bypassed the receptionist and walked directly into his corner office. "I have unlocked the trust," I told him, dropping the new corporate checkbook onto his polished mahogany desk. "Now I want you to hire the most ruthless corporate espionage firm in this city. I do not want cheap private detectives taking blurry photos from parked cars. I want digital forensic experts. I want former federal agents who know exactly how to completely dismantle a corrupt banking executive." Robert did not hesitate for a second. He picked up his secure phone and made a single phone call. Within 2 hours, we were sitting in a sterile, secure conference room across from 3 men in sharp, tailored suits. They were the apex predators of the intelligence sector, specializing in corporate fraud, digital tracing, and total financial ruin. The lead investigator, a cold-eyed man named Vance, opened his laptop. "Who is the target?" he asked. "Her name is Megan Cole," I stated, sliding a photograph of my daughter-in-law across the large conference table. "She is a senior credit officer at the First National Bank downtown. She thinks she is completely untouchable because she knows how to manipulate bureaucratic loopholes. I want you to tear her professional life down to the microscopic level. I want her work emails, her internal chat logs, her transaction histories, and her deleted files. I want every single digital footprint she has left over the past 5 years. She is currently trying to execute a fraudulent all-cash sale of my property to cover massive personal debts. If she is willing to commit felony elder abuse and forge legal documents in broad daylight, I guarantee she is hiding much darker secrets in the shadows of her corporate job." Vance looked at the photograph, then looked up at me. "Bypassing commercial bank firewalls and digging into a senior executive's secure files is highly complex. It is going to be incredibly expensive, Mr. Cole." "I do not care what it costs," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. You have a blank check. Spend whatever it takes to get the job done. I want her completely exposed, and I want it done before she can close the sale on my house." The investigators immediately went to work packing up their equipment with professional efficiency. I left the building and checked into an ultra-luxury high-security penthouse suite under a corporate alias provided by Robert. Sitting on a leather sofa overlooking the sprawling city skyline, I poured myself a glass of aged bourbon and reflected on the sheer pathetic irony of my son's existence. Derek and Megan were the perfect embodiment of modern flashy debt. They drove imported luxury vehicles they did not own, wore designer clothes bought with high-interest credit cards, and projected an image of supreme, untouchable wealth while suffocating under a mountain of unpaid bills. They measured their entire worth by what other people could see. Evelyn and I had chosen the exact opposite path. We understood that silent wealth is the only real wealth. Silent wealth does not need to show off or seek validation. It waits patiently in the dark, gathering immense strength, ready to deploy devastating force precisely when it is needed. Megan thought she had crushed a helpless old man by using her banking clearance to drain a measly $60,000. She thought she was a financial genius. She had absolutely no idea she had just declared war on a man who could buy her entire neighborhood in cash and still have millions left over. I spent the next 48 hours waiting in absolute silence. I did not contact Derek. I completely ignored the vicious messages Megan sent to my phone demanding I sign additional medical waivers or face permanent institutionalization. I simply watched the city lights from my penthouse window and let the trap close tightly around them. On the morning of the third day, there was a sharp, rhythmic knock on my penthouse door. I opened it to find Vance standing in the hallway. He was holding a thick, encrypted flash drive and a heavy red manila folder. He did not smile. He looked at me with a mixture of professional awe and grim satisfaction. "You were absolutely right about her," Mr. Cole Vance said, stepping into the room and dropping the heavy folder onto the glass coffee table. "What is inside this file is not just professional misconduct, it is systemic, predatory fraud on a massive scale. We found exactly what she has been hiding, and it is going to put your daughter-in-law in a federal penitentiary for a very long time." I opened the heavy red folder, the thick cardstock feeling surprisingly light considering the absolute devastation contained within its pages. The top document was an internal banking ledger covered in aggressive red highlights, complex routing numbers, and flagged transaction histories. Vance leaned over the glass coffee table, pointing a steady finger at a specific cluster of offshore transfers dating back 18 months. "Megan is not just a terrible daughter-in-law," Mr. Cole Vance explained, his voice low and clinical. "She is an active, calculating predator. She has been specifically targeting elderly clients at First National Bank for years. We traced her digital footprint. She actively seeks out clients with early-stage dementia or those who do not have immediate family members, actively monitoring their monthly statements." Vance flipped the page, revealing a disturbing pattern of forged authorizations and internal bank memos. "She set up sophisticated automated diversion algorithms," Vance continued. "She has been skimming thousands of dollars a month from these vulnerable accounts, funneling the money through a labyrinth of dummy corporations before it eventually lands in her personal offshore holdings. She gaslights the victims if they ever notice a discrepancy, claiming it is just standard banking fees or taxes they simply forgot about." The sheer magnitude of her cruelty made my jaw tighten. She was a monster operating in a tailored business suit. "But she got arrogant," Vance said, tapping a particularly alarming spreadsheet. 2 months ago, she got greedy and siphoned a massive chunk of capital from a high-net-worth estate to cover the skyrocketing interest on Derek's failed startup loans. It was a sloppy move. Now the bank has announced a comprehensive surprise end-of-year corporate audit. The federal compliance officers are arriving in early December. Megan is currently sitting on a $350,000 black hole in her ledger. The puzzle pieces snap together with a sickening clarity. The rush to sell my house for cash under the table to a shady real estate broker. The sudden Thanksgiving ambush to keep me disoriented. The forged medical power of attorney. It was never just about funding her luxury lifestyle or buying designer clothes. It was a desperate, panicked scramble for survival. She needed the illicit cash from my home to plug the massive hole in her bank's ledger before the federal auditors arrived and inspected her files. She was literally planning to sacrifice my life, my freedom, and my home to buy her own get-out-of-jail-free card. Vance closed the folder and looked at me. "We have enough digital evidence right here to trigger a massive federal indictment. We can forward this dossier directly to the FBI White-Collar Crime Division tonight. They will raid her office by morning. Do you want me to make the call? I stared at the red folder for a long moment, listening to the hum of the city traffic far below my penthouse window. Handing this to the authorities right now is too clean, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady calm. She goes to jail, but Derek gets to play the innocent, betrayed husband. He walks away claiming he had no idea his wife was a criminal mastermind, files for bankruptcy, and escapes the consequences of his own cowardice. I watched him stand aside while the police put me in handcuffs. I watched him trade his father for a woman who views him as nothing more than a convenient shield. I want them both trapped in a cage of their own making. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Robert Pierce. My lawyer answered on the first ring. Robert, I said I want to talk about my son's debt. You mentioned earlier that he owes roughly $400,000 largely to aggressive secondary market lenders and predatory credit agencies due to his failed business ventures. That is correct, Robert replied, his tone shifting into pure legal strategy. Derek's tech startup failure and the massive second mortgage he took out were bundled and sold off to a series of aggressive debt collection firms. They hold the liens on his imported cars, his personal assets, and what is left of the equity in his home. I want to buy it. I instructed, my eyes locked on the glittering city skyline. Every single penny of it. Set up a blind shell company, call it Evelyn Holdings. Use the Ghost Trust funds. Purchase Derek's entire debt portfolio at a premium if you have to, but I want exclusive, undisputed ownership of his financial obligations by tomorrow morning. I want the legal right to foreclose on his vehicles, garnish his wages, and seize his remaining assets the exact second he defaults. Robert let out a low, dark chuckle over the line. A hostile financial takeover of your own son. It is a brilliant, vicious maneuver, Garrett. By purchasing the debt through a shielded LLC, Derek will simply think his loans were bought out by a faceless, ruthless corporate creditor. He will be entirely unaware that the man holding the leash, the man who legally owns his entire existence on paper, is the father he locked in a freezing basement. I will have my acquisitions team finalize the purchase agreements before sunrise. I ended the call and thanked Vance for his exceptional work, dismissing the investigators for the night. Left alone in the sprawling luxury of the penthouse, I poured myself a small glass of water and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window. 40 years of working as a master plumber had taught me one indisputable truth about pressure. When a pipe is severely compromised, when the rot has taken hold deep within the system, you do not just patch the surface and walk away. You let the pressure build. You watch the microscopic cracks spread, letting the system push itself to the absolute breaking point. Then, when the tension is at its maximum, you turn the main valve and let the entire structure violently collapse under its own weight. I had the meticulous financial patience to wait for that exact moment. I spent the next 24 hours operating in total silence, observing the digital chessboard from my secure suite. Robert's legal team executed the debt purchase flawlessly. For a few $1,000s in premium buyout fees, Evelyn Holdings officially became Derek Cole's sole creditor. My son was now my property. Meanwhile, my bank alerts confirmed that Megan was frantically trying to finalize the shady appraisal of my home, rushing the fraudulent sale to secure her stolen cash. They thought they were sprinting toward the finish line, completely blind to the brick wall I had just constructed across their path. But just as the final signature dried on my son's financial death warrant, my encrypted secure phone vibrated harshly on the marble kitchen counter. I had deliberately kept my old number active, waiting to see if Derek would have the nerve to call me. I checked the screen. It was an unknown number, but the moment I answered, I recognized the frantic, breathless voice immediately. "Mr. Cole," the voice whispered, trembling with sheer terror. "It is Toby. From the bank. From Thanksgiving night." I stood up straight, my senses instantly going on high alert. "Toby," I replied smoothly. "I have been wondering when you would reach out again." "Megan is completely out of her mind," Toby stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a panicked rush. "She is forcing me to digitally forge loan approvals and mask her missing funds. She told me if I do not comply, she will pin the missing $350,000 on my employee ID and have me arrested. I cannot go to the police and I cannot go to the bank managers because she has them fooled. Please, Mr. Cole, I know what she did to your accounts. I know she stole your pension. I need to meet you face to face right now. My life is in danger and you are the only one who understands what she really is." I gave Toby an address for a 24-hour diner on the industrial edge of the city, a place illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights and smelling heavily of stale grease and burnt coffee. It was a location where corporate bankers in tailored suits would never dare to set foot. I arrived 30 minutes early, taking a booth in the far back corner facing the entrance. At exactly 11 o'clock, the diner door chimed. Toby walked in. He was a young man barely out of his 20s, but he looked as though he had aged a decade in a single week. His tie was loosened, his shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room with the frantic energy of a hunted animal. He spotted me and practically collapsed into the vinyl booth across the table. He did not ask for a menu. He just stared at me, his hands shaking so violently he had to clasp them together on the sticky tabletop. "Mr. Cole," Toby whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if Megan might materialize from the kitchen. "I am so sorry to drag you into this, but you are the only person who knows what she is capable of. She has completely lost her mind. The corporate audit is less than a week away, and she is backed into a corner." I slid a cup of black coffee toward him. "Breathe, Toby. Panic is a useless emotion. It makes you sloppy. Tell me exactly what my daughter-in-law is trying to do." Toby took a gulp of the scalding coffee, wincing but grateful for the anchor. "She is trying to build a firewall out of my career," he explained, his voice thick with despair. "The auditors are going to find the $350,000 deficit in her ledger. She knows she cannot hide the missing funds anymore. So this afternoon, she pulled me into her office, locked the door, and gave me an ultimatum. She wants me to use my junior security clearance to authorize 3 phantom corporate loans. The loans are designed to temporarily inject enough capital into the flagged accounts to make the ledger balance out perfectly before the federal compliance officers run their scan." I leaned back against the vinyl seat, processing the sheer venom of her strategy. "She wants you to execute the fraud using your digital footprint," I said, seeing the trap clearly. Toby nodded miserably, tears of sheer frustration pooling in his eyes. "Exactly. Once the audit is over, the phantom loans will inevitably default. But by then, the auditors will be gone, and the blame will fall entirely on the junior analyst who processed the paperwork. Me. If I refuse to do it, she promised to fire me tomorrow morning for gross insubordination and flag my financial license for suspicious activity. I will be blacklisted. I will never work in the financial sector again. But if I comply when those loans default, the federal investigators will trace the IP address straight to my desk. I will take the fall for her embezzlement, and I will go to federal prison while she plays the shocked, disappointed manager." Megan was not just a thief. She was a parasite. She was perfectly willing to destroy a young man's entire life just to buy herself a few more months of freedom. I looked at the terrified kid across from me. He was drowning, completely paralyzed by the immense weight of corporate leverage. He thought he was trapped in an unwinnable scenario. He did not know that the man sitting across from him owned the board they were playing on. I reached inside my heavy wool coat and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. I slid it across the sticky table. Toby stared at it as if it were a bomb. "Open it," I instructed calmly. His shaking fingers broke the seal. Inside was a comprehensive legal retainer agreement from the law firm of Robert Pierce. It was specifically drafted for the Whistleblower Protection Division, and it was already stamped as paid in full by Evelyn Holdings. Attached to the contract was a cashier's check for $50,000 to cover Toby's immediate living expenses should he be wrongfully terminated. Toby looked up at me, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock. "Mr. Cole, I do not understand. How can you possibly afford a firm like Robert Pierce? This is Tier 1 corporate defense." "I am full of surprises," I replied flatly. "But legal protection is only the shield, Toby. We need a sword." I reached into my pocket a second time and pulled out a small, sleek device that looked exactly like a standard car key fob. It was actually a military-grade digital extraction drive provided to me by Vance's corporate espionage team earlier that day. I placed it gently next to his coffee cup. "Here is what you are going to do," I said, leaning forward, projecting absolute authority. "You are going to go into the bank tomorrow morning. You are going to look terrified. You are going to let her bully you. You will sit at your terminal and you will agree to process those phantom loans exactly as she demands." Toby swallowed hard, his eyes wide. "But Mr. Cole, if I process them, I leave the digital footprint. I am guilty." "You are only guilty if she controls the narrative," I countered. "Before you execute her orders, you will plug this key fob into the back of your terminal. It runs a silent, undetectable cloning program. It will record your terminal screen capture, every keystroke copy the internal routing data, and most importantly, it will extract the digital authorization override she is using to force the transaction through the system. It will prove unequivocally that the commands were initiated under her executive duress. You will comply with her demands, and in doing so, you will hand me the smoking gun I need to put her away for a decade." Toby stared at the small black device. The The fear in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a slow, dawning realization that he was no longer a helpless victim. He was a weapon. He looked at me, seeing past the faded wool coat and the blue-collar demeanor. "Who are you, Mr. Cole?" Toby asked, his voice laced with sudden, profound respect. "I am the man who is going to burn her kingdom to the ground," I answered. "Take the drive. Follow my instructions perfectly. Call Robert Pierce in the morning. He will handle your federal immunity paperwork." Toby slipped the device and the legal documents into his briefcase, thanking me profusely before rushing out of the diner into the freezing night. I stayed in the booth for a while longer, drinking the bitter coffee and reflecting on the colossal blast radius of Megan's greed. Some criminals operated out of desperate necessity, but Megan operated out of supreme pathological entitlement. She viewed human beings as disposable assets. She targeted the elderly because she assumed our minds were fading and our voices no longer mattered. She targeted young employees like Toby because they lacked the resources and the leverage to fight back. She had even targeted her own husband, meticulously stripping away Derek's spine until he was nothing more than a hollow, obedient shell willing to betray his own father for a shred of her approval. Her collateral damage was staggering. I left a $20 bill on the table and drove back to my secure high-rise penthouse. The city was quiet, but the storm was gathering on the horizon. I walked through the opulent lobby of the building, nodding to the overnight concierge. "Mr. Cole," the concierge called out politely, stepping out from behind the polished marble desk. "A bonded courier dropped this off for you about an hour ago. He said it required a signature, but given your strict privacy instructions, I signed for it on your behalf as the building representative." He handed me a thick, stiff legal envelope. It bore the official seal of the county family court. My instincts flared immediately. I took the envelope up to my suite, turned on the bright overhead lights, and tore open the flap. Inside was an official expedited court summons. Derek and Megan were not waiting for the holidays. They had officially filed a petition for my involuntary psychiatric commitment and emergency medical guardianship. Attached to the summons was a heavily fabricated signed affidavit from a corrupt psychiatrist claiming I was a severe danger to myself and others. They were forcing a competency hearing in front of a judge in exactly 48 hours. If I failed to appear, or if I lost, they would legally strip me of my human rights, lock me in a clinical facility, and seize everything I owned. The final battle lines were drawn. The court order attached to the summons mandated a compulsory psychological evaluation prior to the competency hearing. Megan had not left this critical detail to chance. She had handpicked the physician, a Dr. Philip Thorne, whose private clinic sat in a high-end commercial district. Dr. Thorne was notorious in elite legal and financial circles as a hired gun. He was a man with a medical degree who specialized in rubber-stamping severe dementia diagnoses for wealthy families eager to seize immediate control of their aging parents' estates. He provided the medical justification for financial theft, wrapping a brutal robbery in the sterile white coat of healthcare. I arrived at the clinic the next morning exactly 5 minutes early. I was not alone. Robert Pierce accompanied me, completely stripped of his usual ruthless corporate aura. He wore a simple black suit and a chauffeur's cap, keeping his head respectfully bowed, perfectly playing the role of a hired driver for a frail, confused old man. We walked into the sterile, overly bright waiting room, and the receptionist ushered us into Dr. Thorne's expansive office almost immediately. Dr. Thorne sat behind a massive glass desk, steepling his perfectly manicured fingers. He wore a tailored designer suit under a pristine white lab coat, projecting an aura of manufactured empathy that made my skin crawl. He looked at me with the sickeningly sweet, condescending smile usually reserved for toddlers or the mentally incapacitated. "Have a seat, Garrett," Dr. Thorne said, intentionally refusing to use my last name in order to establish an immediate psychological dominance. "Your son and his wife have expressed deep concern about your recent behavior. They tell me you have been highly aggressive, wandering around the city aimlessly and suffering from severe paranoia. Let us start with something very simple. Do you know what city we are in right now? Can you tell me the current year?" I let my shoulders slump, sinking deeply into the plush leather guest chair. I allowed my hands to tremble slightly, resting them heavily on my knees. I gave him exactly the performance he was being paid to document. I answered his questions slowly, occasionally pausing as if struggling to grasp a fleeing thought deliberately, looking toward Robert as if seeking permission to speak. Dr. Thorne grew increasingly confident, scribbling aggressively on his yellow legal pad. He pressed harder, changing his tone to provoke a hostile reaction. "Megan tells me you accused her of stealing your money, Garrett. Paranoia regarding personal finances is a classic, undeniable symptom of cognitive decline. You understand that your family is only trying to protect you from making terrible financial mistakes, do you not? I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, playing the part of a broken, intimidated senior citizen. I understand they want my house, I mumbled softly, letting my voice crack with feigned despair. I know they want my pension. Dr. Thorne smiled, a predatory, victorious smile. He had his narrative. He leaned forward to deliver the final psychological blow, preparing to formally dismiss my lucid complaints as the ravings of a sick mind. But it was in that precise moment of his absolute arrogance that I sprang the trap. I reached into my heavy coat pocket as if searching for a handkerchief. Instead, my trembling hand snagged the edge of a thick, official-looking legal folder I had deliberately placed there. I pulled it out clumsily, letting it slip from my grasp. The folder hit the polished floor, spilling its contents violently across the expensive Persian rug. Robert, playing the dutiful driver, instantly dropped to his knees to gather the scattered papers. But he moved just slowly enough to ensure Dr. Thorne got a perfectly clear view of the bold, red-lettered documents facing upward on the floor. Dr. Thorne's smug expression vanished in a millisecond. His eyes locked onto the papers. They were highly authentic-looking, albeit entirely fabricated, irrevocable trust transfers. The documents clearly stated that Garrett Cole was finalizing the immediate transfer of his entire pension, his savings accounts, and the deed to his brick house to a highly aggressive, notoriously litigious national wildlife charity. The paperwork indicated that the transfer was absolute, leaving zero liquid assets or property to any surviving family members. Robert quickly gathered the papers, offering a sheepish apology, and tucked them back into my coat. But the damage was done. Dr. Thorne was a mercenary, and mercenaries only work when they are guaranteed to get paid. He knew Megan was broke. He knew she was relying entirely on the swift cash sale of my house to pay his exorbitant under-the-table fee for falsifying my medical records. If I gave the house away to a charity today, Megan would be bankrupt by tomorrow, and Thorne would never see a single dime of his illicit money. A visible sheen of sweat broke out on Dr. Thorne's forehead. He abruptly stood up from his desk, clearing his throat nervously. "Excuse me for one moment, Garrett. I need to consult a colleague regarding a detail in your file. Please wait here." He practically sprinted out of the room, shutting the heavy wooden door behind him. He hurried down the hall into his private, soundproof annex. He thought he was secure, but he severely underestimated the men he was dealing with. The moment Thorne left the room, Robert reached under his chauffeur cap and tapped a small receiver in his ear. Prior to our arrival, Vance's espionage team had hacked the clinic's internal phone network. Every call routed through Thorne's private office was currently being captured and recorded on Robert's secure server. Robert nodded at me, a wolfish grin spreading across his face as he listened to the live audio feed. Through the hidden network, we heard Thorne dial a number frantically. Megan picked up on the second ring. Megan Thorne hissed into the receiver, his professional demeanor entirely gone. "We have a massive problem. The old man is sitting in my office right now, and he just dropped legal paperwork transferring his entire estate to a charity. The deed, the pension, everything." What? Megan shrieked through the phone line, her voice cracking with pure panic. "That is impossible. I have the power of attorney." "He is executing an irrevocable trust bypass," Thorne yelled back, sweating. "You told me the assets were secure. If he signs those papers before the court hearing tomorrow, you get nothing. And if you get nothing, I do not get my $50,000 consultation fee. I am not committing perjury and risking my medical license for a bankrupt client, Megan. Fix this today, or I am shredding the affidavit and canceling the hearing." Robert ended the recording and removed his earpiece. We had the smoking gun. A licensed medical professional had just confessed on tape to exchanging a fabricated medical diagnosis for a $50,000 payout from my daughter-in-law. Sitting in that sterile clinic, a profound disgust washed over me. This was the dark, horrifying underbelly of elder care. People assume that the greatest threat to a senior citizen is a failing body or a fading mind. The truth is far more sinister. The greatest threat is a system that allows greedy relatives to weaponize medical authority for personal profit. Doctors who took a solemn oath to do no harm were actively participating in a sanitized form of human trafficking, stripping the elderly of their legal rights, their dignity, and their homes, all for a cut of the inheritance. It was a vile, predatory industry that thrived in the shadows, and I was going to completely dismantle this one piece of it. Dr. Thorne returned to the office a few minutes later, pale and visibly shaking. He hurriedly concluded the session, offering vague platitudes before rushing us out the door. He was a rat abandoning a sinking ship, terrified that his payday had just evaporated. As Robert drove us back to the safety of the luxury penthouse, my secure phone vibrated with a new update from Vance's surveillance team. Megan was in total freefall. With Dr. Thorne threatening to back out and the house sale legally stalled by her impending panic over the fake charity documents, her corporate audit was now only days away. She was completely out of time and out of options. The surveillance intercept revealed she was pivoting to a desperate, immediate alternative. Since she could not liquidate the house today, she was going to liquidate what was inside it. She had just contracted a high-end cash-only estate auctioneer to illegally sell off every single piece of Evelyn's priceless antique furniture this coming weekend. She thought she could turn my most precious memories into fast cash. She was about to find out that I was the phantom bidder ready to destroy her. I sat in the darkened living room of my penthouse suite, a secure tablet glowing brightly on the glass coffee table in front of me. Vance, the lead corporate investigator I hired, had easily infiltrated the private estate sale Megan organized. She did not use a public auction house or a legitimate estate liquidator. She was far too desperate and needed cash without the standard 30-day clearing period. Instead, she rented a sleek, modern gallery space downtown, inviting her elite, pretentious country club circle for an exclusive invite-only liquidation event. Through the hidden camera pinned to Vance's lapel, I watched my entire life displayed on cold, sterile pedestals under harsh gallery lighting. There was the handcrafted oak dining table where Derek ate his childhood meals, the table where I had spent countless evenings helping him with his homework. There was Evelyn's prized collection of vintage jazz records and the stunning mid-century cedar chest we saved up for 3 years to buy when we first got married. Megan was standing in the center of the room wearing a designer cocktail dress and holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was laughing loudly with a group of women draped in expensive furs and diamonds mocking the very items she was selling. "Oh, this old thing," Megan sneered, tapping her manicured nails against the pristine glass of Evelyn's antique display cabinet. "My father-in-law hoarded this junk for decades. It is dreadfully outdated, but I suppose it has a certain rustic working-class charm. I am letting it go for an absolute steal today just to clear up storage space before we finalize his medical placement." My jaw tightened. She was selling my wife's heritage for pennies just to save her own skin, masking her financial panic behind a veil of high society arrogance. She had hired a slick, unethical auctioneer who specialized in quick liquidations for desperate socialites. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium, announcing that all sales today required immediate wire transfers or certified cashier checks, bypassing all standard tax declarations. Megan was boldly organizing a black market asset dump right in front of her wealthy friends. The bidding began on the cedar chest. A woman in a fur coat raised her paddle, offering a pathetic $200 for a piece worth at least $3,000. Megan nodded eagerly, radiating a desperate hunger for the cash. I picked up my secure phone and dialed the number for Robert's proxy bidder. We had hired a sophisticated actor with a flawless European accent posing as the acquisition manager for a reclusive foreign billionaire. He was standing at the back of the gallery dressed in a sharp bespoke suit holding a numbered paddle. $5,000, the proxy announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority through the gallery. Megan's head snapped toward the back of the room. The women in the fur coats gasped in shock. The auctioneer blinked rapidly, then eagerly accepted the bid. For the next hour, I orchestrated a complete financial hijacking from the comfort of my penthouse. Every time Megan's friends tried to bid on Evelyn's heirlooms, my proxy crushed them with absurd astronomical numbers. A vintage armchair worth $500 went for $10,000. The mahogany dining table sold for $25,000. I was buying back my own memories, but I was doing it to build a flawless legal trap. Megan was practically vibrating with greed. She watched the total sales skyrocket past $150,000 in a matter of minutes, completely abandoning her wealthy friends to cater exclusively to the whale buyer at the back of the room. When the auction concluded, my proxy approached Megan and the auctioneer in a private back office. Vance followed closely behind his hidden camera, capturing every single word. "My client is incredibly private," the proxy stated smoothly, placing a heavy leather briefcase on the desk. "He prefers to operate entirely off the books. He will authorize an immediate offshore wire transfer for the total amount of $150,000. However, he requires you to sign these specific cash receipt documents claiming the items were donated or sold for less than $5,000 total to avoid luxury export taxes and federal oversight." It was blatant, undeniable tax fraud and international money laundering. A legitimate banker would have called corporate security immediately. But Megan was a desperate criminal staring at a financial lifeline. She did not even hesitate to break the law. She grabbed her designer pen and signed the falsified tax documents, effectively committing federal tax evasion on a crystal-clear video recording. Watching her sign her own federal indictment brought a cold wave of satisfaction, but it was heavily layered with profound sorrow. Seeing Evelyn's cherished possessions treated like pawnshop collateral broke my heart. I remembered the day we bought that cedar chest. Evelyn had run her hands over the smooth wood, turning to me with a smile that lit up the entire room. She said it smelled like the future we were going to build. We had built our life piece by piece, protecting our heritage in a world that constantly tried to tear us down. Buying these items back was not just a calculated legal maneuver, it was a rescue mission. I was pulling Evelyn's soul out of the filthy, greedy hands of a woman who knew the price of everything and the value of absolutely nothing. It sickened me to know that Derek, my own flesh and blood, had allowed this to happen. He had stood by while his wife priced out his mother's legacy to pay off their fraudulent debts. The proxy packed up the falsified receipts, sliding them securely into his briefcase, and shook Megan's hand. As he turned to leave the back office, he paused, delivering the final fatal hook exactly as Robert and I had instructed. "My client is fascinated by the exceptional quality of these pieces," the proxy said, casually adjusting his suit jacket. He mentioned he might be interested in the estate they originated from. If the actual property is available for a rapid, all-cash transaction, he is willing to pay 20% over market value to close the deal by Friday. Megan's eyes widened with sheer unadulterated greed. The missing piece of her massive embezzlement puzzle had just fallen perfectly into her lap. She had absolutely no idea she had just agreed to sell my own house back to a mysterious investment group entirely controlled by me. The micro-recorder I had planted under Derek and Megan's dining room table was picking up every single sound with terrifying clarity. Sitting in my secure penthouse, I pressed the earpiece deeper into my ear to ensure I did not miss a single syllable. The heavy front door of their house slammed shut with a violent bang. Megan's high heels clicked rapidly across the hardwood floor, moving with a frantic, triumphant energy that radiated through the audio feed. She slapped a thick stack of expedited real estate documents onto the mahogany table right above my hidden microphone. "Derek," she shouted, her voice trembling with sheer exhilaration. "Get out here right now! We did it! We found our golden ticket!" Derek's hesitant footsteps approached the dining room. He sounded exhausted, weighed down by the massive, suffocating debts I now legally owned. "What is it, Megan? What is going on?" She did not miss a beat. "I just secured a cash buyer for your father's house. A foreign investment proxy attended the estate sale and offered 20% over the asking price. $500,000, Derek. Pure untraceable cash closing by this Friday. It covers the mortgage arrears, it clears the maxed out credit cards, and it completely fixes the internal audit discrepancy at my bank. We are saved." The silence that followed was heavy and revealing. Derek did not cheer. He did not immediately match her manic excitement. His voice came through the audio feed, weak and wavering. "Megan, it is Dad's house, the house I grew up in. Rushing an off-the-books cash sale to a faceless foreign entity feels like crossing a line we can never uncross. If the authorities look closely at that forged power of attorney, we are going to federal prison." Megan slammed her hands down on the table, the sharp sound echoing painfully in my ear. "Do not play the moral victim now, Derek," she hissed, her tone vicious and commanding, stripping away any illusion of respect she had left for him. "We are standing on the edge of total financial ruin. You lost our money on your pathetic startup venture. You maxed out the second mortgage because you wanted to play the big-shot entrepreneur. If we do not execute this sale today, we are homeless by Christmas. Act like a man for once in your life. Your father's mind is completely gone. He is sitting in a cheap motel or wandering the streets completely unaware of what day it is. He does not need that house, but we absolutely need this cash. Sign the closing authorization right now." I listened as my son's remaining shred of conscience evaporated into the cold air. He offered no further resistance, no defense of the man who had raised him. The distinct scratch of a pen against heavy paper filled the audio feed. Derek was signing away his childhood home, finalizing his ultimate unforgivable betrayal. A moment later, the loud pop of a champagne cork echoed through the room. They laughed and toasted to their victory, clinking crystal glasses together, entirely convinced they had just executed the perfect crime. I slowly removed the earpiece, feeling a cold, dark satisfaction settle deep in my chest. Robert Pierce was sitting across from me in the penthouse suite, nursing a glass of sparkling water while reviewing a secure legal tablet. He looked up, catching the grim determination hardening in my eyes. They signed the preliminary closing agreements, I stated flatly, placing the earpiece on the glass coffee table. They are expecting the $500,000 wire transfer by Friday morning. Robert allowed a sharp, predatory smile to cross his face. He tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up the digital contracts Megan had just blindly authorized and transmitted to his office. She is so blinded by her own greed and desperation that she did not even bother to run a rudimentary background check on the buyer, Robert explained, his voice laced with deep professional amusement. The foreign investment group she is so thrilled to sell to is a front company registered in Delaware. It is a subsidiary entirely controlled by your ghost trust. She is literally selling your own house back to you, Garrett. I leaned back into the leather sofa, letting the sheer magnitude of the trap wash over me. What happens when she tries to process the cash transfer? I asked, wanting to hear the exact mechanics of her impending destruction. Robert set the tablet down and folded his hands. That is the absolute masterpiece of this operation. Because she insisted on a rapid off-the-books transaction to dodge federal oversight, she knowingly transmitted fraudulent real estate documents across state lines using a digital network. By signing those papers and routing the proceeds to an offshore holding account to hide her corporate embezzlement, she has officially committed federal wire fraud. The $500,000 she is eagerly expecting will never hit her shadow account. Robert paused, his smile widening into something truly lethal. We have coordinated with the highest levels of the banking compliance division. The moment she attempts to clear the incoming wire transfer, the funds will be automatically diverted into a heavily monitored federal escrow account. This will trigger an immediate unblockable alert to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. She thinks she has secured her salvation. In reality, she has just locked the door to her own prison cell. I absorbed the brilliant, devastating strategy. Megan and Derek had celebrated way too early. Every single signature they placed on those closing documents added another 5 to 10 years to their inevitable federal sentences. They had dug their own graves, purchased the headstones, and gladly jumped inside. All I had to do now was throw the dirt. We finalized the paperwork tomorrow at the notary office, Robert confirmed, standing up to gather his briefcase and secure files. I have arranged for the closing to take place at the most prestigious legal firm in the financial district. They are expecting a faceless corporate proxy to show up with a briefcase full of money to finalize the deed transfer. I stood up and shook my lawyer's hand, my grip firm and resolute. Tell the notary to prepare the largest boardroom they have, I instructed, because the proxy is not going. I will be attending the closing myself. When Robert left, the penthouse fell into a profound, heavy silence. It was the distinct, unmistakable calm before a massive storm. In my 40 years of working with high-pressure commercial plumbing systems, I had learned a fundamental rule about catastrophic failures. Before a heavy iron pipe bursts, it does not make a sound. The pressure builds internally, expanding the metal at a microscopic level. Everything appears perfectly normal and completely intact on the outside. Then, in a single fraction of a second, the tension exceeds the absolute threshold, and the entire structure violently detonates, destroying everything in its path. I walked into the master bedroom and opened the expansive cedar closet. I bypassed the faded wool coats, the cheap flannel shirts, and the scuffed work boots I had worn to play the helpless, confused victim. I reached for a heavy garment bag that a private tailor had delivered earlier that day. Inside was a pristine, custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white dress shirt, and a dark silk tie. I laid the clothes out meticulously on the bed, smoothing out the invisible creases. I was shedding the skin of the broken old man they thought they had easily defeated. I was stepping back into my true power, reclaiming my dignity and my name. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights flicker and slowly fade as the dark night gave way to the early morning. The sun slowly crested over the horizon, casting a cold, brilliant light across the towering skyscrapers and the busy streets below. The day of the closing had finally arrived. The board was perfectly set, the pieces were locked into place, and the final checkmate was merely hours away. The upscale notary office was located on the 45th floor of a gleaming glass high-rise in the absolute center of the financial district. It was a space designed entirely to intimidate and impress, featuring imported Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows boasting panoramic views of the city, and a massive polished mahogany conference table that dominated the central boardroom. This was the arena where the wealthy finalized their triumphs. For Megan and Derek, it was supposed to be the finish line of their most lucrative and deceitful marathon. They arrived 20 minutes early, radiating an arrogant, intoxicating energy. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, anyone could see they had dressed specifically for a victory lap. Megan wore a sleek tailored designer dress that projected corporate invincibility paired with diamond earrings she had undoubtedly purchased on credit to celebrate her impending $500,000 payday. Derek wore a sharp navy suit, pacing the length of the room with a nervous but eager bounce in his step. They ordered sparkling water and artisanal espresso from the polite legal assistant, treating her with the dismissive, haughty attitude they reserved for anyone they considered beneath them. They checked their luxury watches repeatedly, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the foreign proxy who would hand them their salvation. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Megan immediately stood up, smoothing the front of her dress and pasting on her most brilliant, calculating corporate smile. Derek stopped pacing and turned toward the entrance, ready to shake the hand of the man who was about to buy his childhood home for cash. The smile on Megan's face froze, then it shattered completely. I stepped into the boardroom. I was not shuffling, I was not trembling, I did not look at the floor. I wore a pristine, custom-tailored charcoal suit that fit me with absolute perfection, a crisp white dress shirt and a dark silk tie. My posture was rigid, my shoulders squared, and my gaze was locked onto them with the cold, lethal precision of a sniper. The pathetic, confused old man they had locked in a freezing basement had vanished without a trace. In his place stood a financial titan, a man who had built a silent empire from the ground up, returning to reclaim his throne. Derek physically recoiled, taking a staggering step backward until his lower back hit the edge of the mahogany table. "Dad!" he gasped, all the air rushing out of his lungs. "What are you doing here? How did you get out of the facility?" Megan recovered from her initial shock, her face flushing with sudden, vicious anger. She turned her venomous glare toward the open doorway, expecting to see a security guard. "Derek, get him out of here right now," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "The buyer is going to be here any second. If this crazy old man ruins a $500,000 closing with one of his dementia episodes, I swear to God I will have him committed to a state asylum by noon. Call building security immediately." I did not break eye contact. I walked slowly and deliberately to the head of the mahogany table, pulling out the largest leather chair and sitting down. "The buyer is already here, Megan," I said, my voice resonating with a deep, chilling authority that echoed off the glass walls. Megan let out a harsh, mocking laugh, though her eyes betrayed a sudden flicker of deep uncertainty. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she snapped, gripping the edge of the table. "You are not a buyer, Garrett. You are a retired plumber who does not even know where his own car keys are. Get out of my meeting." I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the polished wood. The sharp metallic snap of the brass latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence of the room. I reached inside and pulled out the thick red manila folder provided by Vance. I dropped it onto the center of the table. Next, I took out the small black digital extraction drive Toby had used to clone her terminal. I placed it gently next to the red folder. Finally, I pulled out a towering stack of heavily notarized, court-certified financial acquisition documents bound in premium legal backing. I dropped them with a heavy thud directly in front of my son. "I am not here to sign my house away," I stated, leaning back in my chair and steepling my fingers. "I am here to collect." Derek stared at the documents in front of him, his hands trembling as he read the bold print on the top page. It was the complete portfolio of his secondary market debts, his failed startup loans, his maxed-out credit cards, and his defaulted second mortgage. "Evelyn Holdings," he whispered, reading the name of the shell company that had purchased his financial life. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "Evelyn Holdings, Mom's name. You bought my debt." Every single penny of it, I confirmed, my voice devoid of any paternal warmth. "I own your house, Derek. I own your cars. I own the absolute legal right to garnish your wages and seize your remaining assets the second you default, which according to these papers officially happens at midnight tonight. You wanted to sell my home to clear your debts. You failed to realize that I am your only creditor." Megan's face turned completely ashen. Her eyes darted wildly from the debt papers to the red folder sitting in the center of the table. She lunged forward, grabbing the red folder and flipping it open. As her eyes scanned the top page, her breath hitched. It was the complete, unredacted internal banking ledger showing the $350,000 deficit in her accounts. It was followed by the digital forensic trail of her offshore transfers, highlighting her systemic embezzlement from her elderly clients. "This is fabricated," Megan whispered, her voice cracking as her hands shook violently. "This is a complete lie. You cannot access these files. You are just a stupid blue-collar old man. You do not have the clearance or the intelligence to bypass bank firewalls. I pointed to the black digital drive resting next to the folder. That is a direct clone of your terminal, Megan. It contains the time-stamped biometric overrides you used to force Toby to authorize your phantom corporate loans. It proves unequivocally that you attempted to cover up massive federal wire fraud using an innocent junior employee as your shield. You thought you were sprinting toward a $500,000 payday by rushing a shady cash sale of my property to a mysterious foreign investment group. I created that investment group. I laid out a pile of cash and you blindly walked right into the trap. The profound, agonizing silence that descended upon the boardroom was the sound of total, inescapable ruin. The power dynamic had violently and permanently inverted. For months they had treated me as a helpless burden, a biological obstacle standing between them and their unearned wealth. They had laughed at my supposed senility, locked me in a damp basement, and conspired with corrupt doctors to strip me of my human rights. Now the veil was ripped away. They realized they had been entirely outmatched, outsmarted, and outplayed by a man who had silently built a financial empire while they were busy drowning in vanity and debt. Derek collapsed into one of the leather chairs, burying his face in his hands as a pathetic broken sob escaped his throat. He had lost everything, his dignity, his father, his home, and his future in a single devastating stroke. But Megan did not surrender. The realization that her entire corporate shield had been obliterated triggered a raw, animalistic fight-or-flight response. The polished, arrogant banker vanished, replaced by a cornered, desperate predator. Her chest heaved as she threw the red folder back onto the table. "You think you have won, you sick old bastard?" she screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical shrill pitch that vibrated against the glass windows. "You cannot prove I generated those files. You obtained this evidence illegally. No court will ever admit this into evidence. I will call the police right now. I will tell them you are stalking me, that you are forging corporate documents, and I will make sure that corrupt psychiatrist locks you in a padded cell before the sun goes down." She snatched her designer handbag off the table, her eyes wild with panic and rage. She turned on her heel and marched furiously toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom, intent on fleeing the building and destroying whatever evidence she had left at her office. "You cannot escape this, Megan," I said calmly, not even bothering to turn my head to watch her flee. "Watch me," she spat, grabbing the brass handle of the door. Before she could pull it open, the heavy double doors swung violently inward from the outside, forcing her to stumble backward in shock. The heavy mahogany doors flew open with such force that Megan had to stumble backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor to avoid being hit. Standing in the threshold was a towering, impeccably dressed woman with steel-gray hair and an expression carved from solid ice. It was Helen Sterling, the chief compliance auditor for First National Bank. And standing directly behind her, no longer trembling, no longer looking like a terrified junior analyst, was Toby. Megan froze, the expensive leather handbag slipping from her grasp and hitting the floor with a dull, heavy thud. The color drained completely from her face as she looked from Helen to Toby, then back to the thick red folder resting on the center of the conference table. The arrogant, untouchable banker was suddenly looking at her own executioners. "Megan Cole," Helen said, her voice echoing through the boardroom with absolute surgical precision. "Your access credentials to the First National mainframe were permanently revoked at 9 o'clock this morning. Building security has already cleared your desk and your corporate accounts are frozen." Megan opened her mouth, stammering, trying to summon the commanding superior tone she used to bully subordinates, but only a desperate, airy squeak emerged. "Helen, wait, you do not understand. This is a targeted setup. My father-in-law is harassing me. Toby is lying to cover his own accounting mistakes." Toby stepped out from behind the auditor. He did not look at the floor. He looked Megan dead in the eye, his shoulders squared with a newfound courage. "I gave them the cloned drive, Megan," he stated firmly. "The board of directors has the timestamps, the biometric overrides, and the audio recording of you threatening to destroy my career if I did not process your phantom loans. They know everything about the offshore transfers." Helen stepped further into the room, her presence dominating the space. The bank initiated a silent emergency audit at midnight after receiving an anonymous encrypted dossier containing undeniable proof of systemic embezzlement from our elderly clients. You did not just violate banking protocols, Megan. You weaponized our institution to prey on the vulnerable. And today your attempt to wire $500,000 from an unverified real estate transaction directly into an offshore account triggered an automatic federal alert. You are officially terminated for gross misconduct, effective immediately. The corporate facade that Megan had spent her entire adult life meticulously building shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. She was no longer a respected senior credit officer. She was an unemployed, exposed, and entirely ruined criminal. The realization that she possessed zero leverage, no job, no money, and no escape route triggered a terrifying transformation. The polished, sophisticated woman vanished entirely. What replaced her was a cornered, rabid animal. Her chest heaved, her eyes darted frantically around the room, and her hands balled into tight fists. She was trapped, and the panic mutated instantly into pure vicious malice. Derek, who had been sitting paralyzed in his leather chair, slowly stood up. The magnitude of his wife's crimes was finally penetrating his thick skull. He looked at Megan as if he were seeing a complete stranger. "Megan," he whispered, his voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of confusion and heartbreak. "Embezzling from the elderly phantom loans. What have you done? We can fix this. We can hire lawyers. We can figure it out together." Megan whipped her head around, fixing Derek with a glare of such concentrated hatred that it made him physically flinch. "Fix this," Megan shrieked, the sound tearing through the boardroom like shattered glass. "There is no fixing this, you pathetic, spineless loser. Do not stand there looking at me with those stupid, naive eyes. You are the reason we are in this mess." Derek raised his hands defensively, his face pale. I did not tell you to steal from your bank. I did not tell you to forge documents." "You bankrupt us!" she roared, closing the distance between them and jabbing a manicured finger directly into his chest. "You wanted to play the brilliant tech entrepreneur, and you blew hundreds of thousands of dollars on a worthless startup. You maxed out the second mortgage. You financed imported cars we could not afford just to impress your mediocre friends at the country club. I had to steal to keep a roof over our heads because I married an absolute failure of a man." Derek's lower lip quivered. He looked like a scolded child standing in the middle of a corporate boardroom. "But you said you loved me. You said we were a team." A vicious, ugly laugh erupted from Megan's throat. "A team, Derek. I never loved you. I merely tolerated you. I looked at you and saw a weak, malleable idiot attached to a father who I thought was sitting on a massive, easily liquidated nest egg. I married you because I thought Garrett would drop dead of a heart attack and hand us a fortune. But your father turned out to be just as stubborn and useless as you are, hoarding a cheap brick house while we drowned in your pathetic debt." She paced like a caged tiger, unleashing years of suppressed venom, eager to destroy the man she blamed for her downfall. "You let me lock your own father in a damp basement. You stood by while the police dragged him out in handcuffs on a fabricated domestic violence charge. You signed away your childhood home today without shedding a single tear. You have no spine, Derek. You have no morals. You are nothing but a stepping stone that crumbled under my feet." I sat silently at the head of the mahogany table, watching my son absorb the absolute, unfiltered truth of his existence. The words struck him with physical force. Derek fell back into his chair, staring blankly at the polished wood. The realization was devastating and absolute. His entire marriage was a transactional lie. His wife viewed him with profound, unadulterated disgust. But the deepest cut, the one that completely broke him, was the undeniable truth of his own actions. To please a woman who despised him, Derek had actively participated in the destruction of the only person in the room who had ever genuinely loved him. He had traded his father's dignity, his legacy, and his freedom for the illusion of affection from a sociopath. He had abandoned the values Evelyn and I had spent decades trying to instill in him. He had sold his soul, and in return, he received absolutely nothing. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to me, entirely unemployed and bound to a criminal who loathed the very sight of him. The boardroom descended into a thick, suffocating silence. Megan stood panting, her chest rising and falling heavily after her vile outburst. Helen Sterling watched her with clinical disgust while Toby stood tall, finally freed from the shadow of her tyranny. I did not say a word. I simply adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit, letting the unbearable weight of their ruin settle over the room. I had not laid a single hand on them, yet they had completely destroyed each other right in front of my eyes. Then, cutting through the heavy silence, a distinct sound drifted up from the city streets 45 floors below. It started as a faint wail echoing off the glass and steel of the surrounding financial district. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, growing louder, sharper, and incredibly urgent. It was not just one vehicle. It was a fleet. The piercing, unmistakable shriek of approaching police sirens reverberated against the thick glass windows of the boardroom. The sound grew deafening, rising rapidly up the side of the skyscraper, signaling that the final inescapable consequence had officially arrived at the front doors of the building. The wail of the sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by the frantic chatter of police radios echoing in the marble hallway outside the boardroom. Heavy, synchronized footsteps approached with terrifying speed. 2 uniformed police officers flanked the double doors, stepping aside as 3 federal agents in dark windbreakers entered the room. The bold yellow lettering on their jackets read FBI Financial Crimes Division. The lead agent, a tall man with a strictly business demeanor, bypassed everyone in the room and locked his eyes directly onto my daughter-in-law. "Megan Cole," he announced, his voice slicing through the thick tension of the room like a blade. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." Megan backed away, hitting the edge of the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Her arrogant bravado completely evaporated, leaving behind raw, unfiltered panic. "Arrest!" she stammered, holding her hands up defensively, her designer dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "There must be some mistake. I am a senior vice president. I demand to speak to my corporate counsel." The agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You have the right to remain silent," he stated, reciting the Miranda warning with practiced efficiency as he closed the distance between them. "You are being charged with systemic embezzlement, federal wire fraud, and the forging of certified medical and legal documents. Your personal and corporate assets have been frozen by federal mandate. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Megan resisted, thrashing wildly as the agents grabbed her arms. The polished, untouchable executive was reduced to a screaming, desperate criminal in a matter of seconds. "Let me go!" she shrieked, struggling against the cold steel biting violently into her wrists. "This is a setup. It is that crazy old man. He planted those files. He faked those transactions." Helen Sterling stepped forward, her arms crossed firmly over her chest, displaying zero sympathy. "The audit logs do not lie, Megan. You stole from the elderly, and you attempted to use our bank infrastructure to launder $500,000 today. You are going to federal prison." Realizing that her corporate shield was entirely gone and her lies held absolutely no power, Megan turned her absolute fury toward the only target left in the room. She twisted her head, locking her venomous gaze on Derek. As the agents dragged her forcefully toward the boardroom doors, she unleashed a torrent of pure, unadulterated hatred. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage and desperation. "If you were a real man, I would not have had to steal. You are a pathetic, useless failure, Derek. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing." Her screams echoed down the pristine marble hallway, fading only when the heavy elevator doors slammed shut, taking her down to the waiting police cruisers. The sudden quiet that returned to the boardroom was heavy, suffocating, and brutally final. Helen and Toby quietly excused themselves, returning to the bank headquarters to assist the federal authorities with the ongoing investigation. The grand, sprawling conference room was suddenly empty, save for 2 men sitting at opposite ends of the long mahogany table. A father and a son separated by an ocean of unforgivable betrayal. Derek remained slumped in the oversized leather chair. His breathing was shallow and erratic, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run a marathon. He stared blankly at the polished wood, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the devastation that had just unfolded before his eyes. In the span of 20 minutes, his entire universe had been violently dismantled. His wife had been hauled away in handcuffs, screaming her profound disgust for him. His career, his reputation, and his manufactured luxury lifestyle were burning to ash around him. Slowly, Derek lifted his heavy head. His eyes, rimmed with red and swimming with tears, shifted to the towering stack of legal documents I had dropped on the table, the debt portfolio. He reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the crisp white pages of the acquisition contracts. He flipped the cover page, reading the stark, undeniable terms of his financial ruin. The numbers stared back at him with total apathy. $400,000 in secondary market loans, failed startup investments, and a defaulted second mortgage. All consolidated, all legally transferred, and all owned entirely by Evelyn Holdings. He looked at me, sitting perfectly still at the head of the table. The pristine charcoal suit I wore seemed to amplify the absolute power dynamic between us. Derek swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper, when he finally found the courage to speak. "Dad, you own everything. You bought my debt." "I own every single mistake you made," I replied, my tone flat, completely devoid of anger, pity, or paternal love. "I hold the liens on your imported cars. I hold the note on your house. By midnight tonight, when your accounts officially default, I have the absolute legal authority to seize every asset you possess and garnish every paycheck you earn for the rest of your natural life. You wanted to sell my home to clear your ledger. Instead, you sold your own soul to a woman who despised you, and you handed me the leash." Derek began to weep. It was a pathetic gasping sound, the sound of a man completely devoid of a safety net. But Mom would not have wanted this. He sobbed, clutching at the name of my late wife like a drowning man grasping for a life preserver. She loved me. She would have wanted us to be a family. "Do not ever speak her name," I commanded, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling register that made him instantly flinch in his chair. "Your mother worked her fingers to the bone to give you a foundation of integrity. She taught you the value of loyalty. You took those lessons, threw them in the garbage, and locked her grieving husband in a damp, freezing basement. You stood perfectly silent while a corrupt police officer put handcuffs on me based on a lie you knowingly endorsed. You have no mother. You have no father. You have a creditor. That is all I am to you now." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket with deliberate, unhurried precision. I did not raise my hand. I did not yell. I simply gathered my leather briefcase, leaving the massive stack of debt documents resting directly in front of him. I turned my back on my only child and walked toward the boardroom doors. Derek cried out, begging me to stay, begging for a second chance, but I did not stop walking. His pleas bounced off the soundproof glass walls, completely unanswered and entirely useless. Stepping out of the towering skyscraper and into the crisp, cold air of the financial district, I felt a profound sense of closure. The bitter taste of absolute defeat belonged entirely to Derek now. For years, he had chased the illusion of elite status, sacrificing his moral compass to appease a partner who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone. He had prioritized the shiny veneer of wealth over the quiet, unshakable strength of family. Now the shiny veneer had cracked, revealing nothing but a vast, hollow void. He was deeply, irrevocably in the hole, with no wife to dictate his life, no luxury house to hide behind, and absolutely no one to save him from the consequences of his own monumental cowardice. I returned to my secure penthouse, watching the city move below me with a renewed sense of peace. The Ghost Trust had executed its purpose flawlessly. I had neutralized the threat, protected my legacy, and delivered a masterclass in silent, devastating accountability. I spent the next few days monitoring the fallout from a comfortable distance, knowing that the structural collapse of Derek's life was only just beginning. The criminal arrest of a senior banking executive makes phenomenal headlines, and the corporate world is utterly merciless when it comes to collateral damage. Exactly 1 week after the ambush in the boardroom, the final domino fell. The scandal surrounding Megan's embezzlement and federal wire fraud was plastered across the front pages of every local financial newspaper. Derek walked into his prestigious corporate sales office completely unaware that his own professional execution was already scheduled. The vice president of sales did not even offer Derek a seat. When my son walked into the sprawling, glass-walled corner office that he had spent years ruthlessly trying to secure for himself, he found his supervisor standing behind the desk holding a printed copy of the Morning Financial Gazette. The headline detailing Megan's spectacular arrest and the massive elder fraud ring was circled in thick red ink. The human resources director was already standing quietly in the corner, clutching a severance packet and a cardboard box. Derek, the vice president, said, his voice entirely devoid of the jovial, back-slapping camaraderie they usually shared at the country club. "We manage the portfolios of high-net-worth individuals. Trust is the absolute foundation of this firm. Your wife is currently sitting in a federal holding cell for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from senior citizens, and our legal department has been notified that your personal wages are slated for maximum legal garnishment by a private holding company. You are an unmitigated public relations disaster. You are terminated effective immediately." Derek tried to argue, tried to distance himself from Megan, desperately pleading that he had no idea what she was doing behind closed doors. The executive simply stared at him with cold corporate apathy. In the business world he worshipped so deeply, loyalty was merely a buzzword. He was escorted out of the building by 2 armed security guards clutching a small cardboard box containing his framed degrees and a few desk trinkets. He was paraded past the staring, whispering faces of his colleagues, entirely stripped of his title and his dignity. He took a ride share back to his upscale suburban neighborhood, hoping to lock himself inside his house and figure out a survival strategy. But the rapid, merciless machinery of Evelyn Holdings had already been deployed. As his ride pulled onto his street, Derek saw a heavy industrial tow truck hooked up to the front axle of his pristine imported sports car. A second recovery agent was busy securing Megan's luxury SUV. Derek sprinted across the manicured lawn, dropping his cardboard box, screaming at the men to stop. The lead recovery agent casually held up a thick clipboard detailing the immediate default execution orders authorized by his primary creditor. "The grace period is over, buddy," the agent said, roughly signaling the driver to pull away. "Your account's defaulted at midnight. The vehicles belong to the holding company now." Derek turned frantically toward his front porch, intending to barricade himself inside. He stopped dead in his tracks. A locksmith was actively drilling out the brass deadbolt on his front door, flanked by a county sheriff holding a formal eviction notice. The house was collateral on the defaulted secondary mortgages I had purchased. The foreclosure process, expedited by the sheer volume of his toxic debt and the criminal seizure of Megan's assets, had locked him out completely. He was not permitted to step foot inside to grab a change of clothes, his electronics, or a single hidden dollar. He was left standing on the freezing pavement wearing a wrinkled suit, watching his entire manufactured existence get towed away down the street. Panic, absolute and blinding, finally overtook him. His credit cards were declined the moment he tried to buy a hot cup of coffee at a corner diner. His calls to his wealthy friends, the men he had bought expensive drinks for just a week prior, went straight to voicemail. He was a radioactive pariah. By nightfall, the bitter winter cold began to seep through the thin fabric of his designer jacket. He had no money, no shelter, and no allies. Desperation forces the mind to search for any available anchor. Derek remembered the frantic phone call on Thanksgiving night. He remembered me telling him I had checked into a cheap highway motel on the industrial outskirts of the city to get some rest. Assuming I was still a confused, vulnerable old man hiding from the chaos, Derek walked 3 miles through the freezing sleet, his expensive leather shoes blistering his heels, until he saw the flickering neon sign of the roadside motel. He stumbled into the cramped, smoke-smelling lobby, leaning heavily against the scratched laminate counter. He begged the night clerk to give him the room number for Garrett Cole. The clerk, an older woman filing her nails, did not even bother checking the computer. She laughed a dry, raspy laugh. "Cole checked out days ago," she stated flatly. Paid in cash, left a few bucks for the maid, and vanished before the sun came up. Derek gripped the counter, his chest heaving. Did he leave a forwarding address? A phone number? Anything? The clerk rolled her eyes, pointing to a small stack of discarded mail. He did not leave a number, but a courier dropped off a legal parcel for him the next afternoon. He had a private delivery service forward it to his actual residence. The address is right there on the shipping manifest. Derek snatched the piece of paper, his bloodshot eyes scanning the printed text. His breath hitched in his throat. He recognized the address immediately. It was not a nursing home. It was not an assisted living facility. It was the Obsidian, the most exclusive, heavily fortified luxury residential skyscraper in the entire financial district. It was a building where penthouses sold for tens of millions of dollars in cash, a fortress reserved for foreign dignitaries, tech billionaires, and the absolute elite. It took Derek another exhausting hour to navigate his way back to the city center. When he finally stood before the towering, illuminated glass walls of the Obsidian, he looked like a broken vagrant. He pushed through the heavy revolving doors, dripping freezing rain onto the flawless, imported marble floor of the grand lobby. 2 massive security guards in tailored suits immediately intercepted him, placing their hands firmly on his chest to stop his forward momentum. "You need to leave the premises, sir." The first guard commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. Derek fought against their grip, tears of sheer desperation streaming down his freezing, dirt-streaked face. "No, please, you do not understand. I am looking for Garrett Cole. He is my father. I am his son. It is a family emergency. I have nowhere else to go. Please just tell him Derek is here." The commotion drew the attention of the head concierge, a man who managed the privacy of billionaires with ruthless efficiency. The concierge stepped out from behind his polished desk, observing the sobbing, shivering man being restrained by security. He noted the name Garrett Cole, knowing full well that the resident of the primary penthouse demanded absolute discretion. The concierge picked up his secure internal phone and dialed my private suite. High above the chaotic city, I was sitting in my velvet armchair, nursing a cup of hot black coffee and watching the winter storm batter the reinforced glass of my penthouse window. The secure line chimed softly. "Mr. Cole," the concierge said, his voice a perfect mask of professional calm. "I sincerely apologize for the intrusion at this hour. There is a man in the lobby who is causing a significant disturbance. He claims his name is Derek and insists he is your son. He is currently begging security to let him up, stating he is homeless and requires immediate family assistance. Should I have the authorities remove him for trespassing? I lowered my coffee cup, letting the profound poetic irony of the moment settle deep into my bones. The roles had completely and violently reversed. Just days ago, Derek had stood comfortably in his warm, sprawling suburban house, watching his wife lock me in a damp, windowless basement. He had looked down on me, viewing his father as a disposable nuisance, an embarrassing relic of a working-class past that he desperately wanted to erase. Now the shiny veneer of his fake wealth had been stripped away. He was the vagrant sullying the pristine lobby of a billionaire's fortress, begging for the very protection he had so casually denied me. The universe possesses a flawless sense of justice provided you have the patience to let it work. I could have easily told the concierge to throw him out into the freezing storm. I could have let the police drag him away for trespassing, completing his total degradation. But walking away in silence would not deliver the absolute finality this betrayal required. He needed to look me in the eye and understand the exact magnitude of his failure. "Do not call the police," I instructed the concierge, my voice a low, unshakable rumble that conveyed absolute authority. "Keep him contained in the lobby. Do not let him pass the security desk. I am coming down." The descent in the private elevator took exactly 45 seconds. The brushed steel doors glided open with a soft melodic chime revealing the sprawling expanse of the grand marble lobby. The space was a monument to untouchable wealth, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and guarded by men who evaluated human worth with clinical precision. In the exact center of this pristine arena stood my son. Derek was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, sharp-dressed corporate director who had sat at the head of a Thanksgiving table just weeks ago. His tailored suit was severely wrinkled, stained with freezing rain and urban grime. His expensive leather shoes, the ones he had worn while silently authorizing my banishment, were scuffed and soaked. He looked small, hollow, and utterly broken. The moment he saw me step out of the elevator, a ragged gasp escaped his throat. He broke away from the security guards who were maintaining a strict perimeter around him and stumbled forward. He did not reach out to shake my hand or offer a dignified greeting. The sheer gravity of his absolute ruin finally crushed his remaining pride. Derek dropped to his knees right there on the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of his bones hitting the stone echoed loudly across the cavernous lobby. He buried his face in his hands, and a loud, wretched sob tore through the quiet air. "Dad," he wept, his voice a pathetic, wavering pitch that stripped away his entire adult facade. "Please, you have to help me. I have nothing left." The bank took the cars. The sheriff locked me out of the house. My accounts are completely frozen. I am sleeping on the streets in the freezing cold. I am your son. Please do not do this to me. I stood exactly 5 feet away from him, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I looked down at the man who shared my blood, searching my own heart for a single lingering drop of paternal sympathy. There was nothing. The well had run completely dry. "Get up, Derek," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, unyielding authority that made the nearby security guards straighten their posture. "Have some dignity." He lifted his head, his face a wet red mask of pure desperation. He did not stand. Instead, he lunged forward, grabbing the hem of my tailored wool trousers, clinging to me like a frightened child. I did not know he sobbed, his words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush to shift the blame. Megan controlled all the accounts. She managed the paperwork. She told me the power of attorney was just a standard medical precaution. She manipulated me, Dad. She brainwashed me into believing you were losing your mind. I was just trying to keep my marriage together. I was scared of her. I did not want to sell the house. She made me do it. I looked down at his trembling hands, gripping my clothing with the same fingers that had signed the closing documents on my life. The sheer cowardice of his excuses disgusted me far more than the actual theft. He was a 38-year-old man, a corporate executive who fired people for a living, and yet he was kneeling on the floor blaming a woman for his own lack of a moral compass. I reached down, grasped his wrists with a vice-like grip, and forcefully detached his hands from my trousers. I took a deliberate step back, severing the physical contact. "Do not insult my intelligence by playing the victim," I stated, my words falling upon him like heavy stones. "You were not brainwashed, Derek. You were greedy. You were perfectly willing to let your own father be discarded like a piece of broken furniture because it secured your luxury lifestyle. You watched your wife lock me in a damp, windowless basement, and you walked upstairs to sleep in a warm bed. You stood silent in your home office while she sliced her own arm open, and you looked a police officer dead in the eye and verified a psychotic lie to have me hauled away in handcuffs." Derek shook his head frantically, fresh tears streaming down his face. I was weak, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I made a terrible mistake. I am so sorry. I will do anything. I will work for you. I will pay back every single cent. Just do not leave me out here to die. You cannot pay back what you owe me, Derek, I replied, my tone devoid of any rising anger, functioning only as a flawless surgical execution of his remaining hopes. The debt you owe is not financial. It is moral, and you are morally bankrupt. You chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of family. You sold your integrity to a woman who openly despised you. I paused, letting the silence hang between us, ensuring that my final words would be etched permanently into his memory. I gave you life, Derek. I broke my back working double shifts to put a roof over your head and pay for the education you used to look down on me. But I am not obligated to fund your greed. I am not obligated to rescue a man who handed the executioner the axe. You made your choice the night you let them lock me out. You chose your side. Now you will live with the consequences of that choice. Dad, please no, he wailed, reaching out for me again. I turned my back on him. I did not hesitate. I did not look over my shoulder. The head concierge caught my eye and gave a sharp, subtle nod to the security team. As I walked slowly and deliberately back toward the gleaming steel doors of the private elevator, the heavy hands of the security guards clamped down on Derek's shoulders. They hauled him to his feet, ignoring his desperate screams, and began dragging him toward the revolving glass doors leading out into the freezing winter storm. The doors of my elevator glided shut, cutting off the sound of his sobbing entirely. The ride back up to the penthouse was completely silent. I walked over to the sprawling glass windows and looked out over the glittering expanse of the city. The bloodline was officially severed. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who had finally met the absolute limit of my generosity. I mourned the boy he used to be, but I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of closure. The toxic infection had been successfully removed from my life. 1 month later, the freezing winds of winter had settled permanently over the city, mirroring the bleak reality of Derek's new existence. The foreclosure on his suburban fortress was absolute and final. Evelyn Holdings had seized every viable asset, liquidating his imported furniture, his high-end electronics, and his designer wardrobe to satisfy a fraction of his massive defaulted debt. In a gritty, run-down neighborhood on the extreme industrial edge of the city, Derek Cole was quietly erasing himself from the elite society he once worshipped. He stood on a cracked sidewalk wearing a faded, oversized jacket he had likely purchased from a thrift store. He hoisted a cheap, taped-up cardboard box into the back of a rented, rusted moving van. He was moving into a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment situated above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. He had no car. He had no corporate title. His phone had stopped ringing weeks ago. He was completely alone, trapped in a prison of minimum wage labor and garnished paychecks, forced to navigate the exact working-class struggle he had spent his entire life mocking. Across town in a highly secure federal detention center, Megan was experiencing her own total systemic collapse. She had attempted to leverage her corporate knowledge to secure a plea deal offering to testify against higher-level executives. The federal prosecutors laughed at her. The digital extraction drive provided by Toby, combined with the staggering evidence of her offshore elder fraud network, left her with absolutely zero negotiating power. She was formally indicted on 34 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She was awaiting a federal sentencing hearing that would guarantee her a minimum of 15 years behind bars. The two people who had conspired to steal my life had completely annihilated their own. While they wallowed in the ashes of their greed, I was busy resurrecting a legacy. I drove my newly purchased reliable American truck back to the neighborhood that had been my sanctuary for 30 years. I pulled into the driveway of my brick house. The heavy oak front door, once splintered by the moving crew, had been completely replaced with a beautiful reinforced mahogany frame. The interior of the house was warm, bright, and fully restored. The proxy buyers from the auction had quietly delivered every single piece of Evelyn's antique furniture back to its rightful place. The cedar chest sat proudly in the hallway. The vintage jazz records were neatly stacked by the record player. The soul of my home had been successfully rescued. But I was not returning to live out my days as a quiet, isolated retiree. I had learned a devastating lesson about the shadows lurking within the elder care and financial systems. There were thousands of senior citizens who did not possess a hidden $8 million ghost trust. There were vulnerable people currently trapped in damp basements, stripped of their pensions by greedy relatives and corrupt doctors entirely unable to fight back. I walked out to the front yard where a team of professional masons was finishing their work on my brick retaining wall. They stepped back respectfully, wiping the mortar from their hands. Secured firmly into the brickwork was a heavy, gleaming bronze plaque. The engraved letters caught the bright morning sunlight. The Evelyn Cole Foundation for Elder Legal Defense. I had partnered with Robert Pierce to establish a fully funded, aggressive, nonprofit legal strike team. We weaponized a massive portion of the Ghost Trust to provide free elite corporate and legal representation to senior citizens facing financial exploitation and medical manipulation from their own families. We employed digital forensic investigators, aggressive litigators, and honest medical professionals. We were actively hunting down corrupt psychiatrists like Dr. Thorne and predatory bankers like Megan. My house was no longer just a home. It was the heavily fortified headquarters of a movement. I stood on the porch tracing the engraved letters of my late wife's name. True justice was never just about destroying the people who tried to hurt you. Retribution is a temporary satisfaction, a fleeting moment of victory that eventually fades into silence. True lasting justice is about taking the weapons used against you and forging them into an impenetrable shield for those who cannot defend themselves. I did not just win a war against my son and his wife, I won my absolute freedom. I proved that aging does not equate to invisibility and that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. I was 69 years old, standing on the porch of the house I built with my own hands, richer in spirit and purpose than I had ever been in my entire life. Sometimes walking away from the people who share your blood is the ultimate victory, leaving you free to protect the people who truly need your strength. Society has a fatal misconception about growing old. People assume that because our hair turns gray and our steps become a little slower, our minds must be dulling and our spirits fading into the background. They look at a senior citizen and see a mark, a liability, an invisible ghost waiting to be escorted to the nearest exit. They forget that we built the very foundations they walk on. They forget that the silence of an older man is rarely confusion. More often than not, it is calculation. I spent decades working, sacrificing, and biting my tongue to provide for my son, holding on to the naive belief that blood was an unbreakable bond. But blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and mutual protection are what actually make you family. When Derek and Megan looked at me, they did not see a grieving widower or a human being. They saw a decaying vault waiting to be cracked open. They mistook my infinite patience for absolute weakness. They assumed my quiet generosity meant I had surrendered my agency. But I learned the hardest lesson a parent can ever face. Unconditional love cannot exist without unconditional respect. Kindness is a gift, but my dignity is not for sale. I will never again set myself on fire simply to keep someone else warm, especially not someone who gladly handed the matches to my executioner. Today, I am thriving. My physical health is better than it has been in 20 years because I am no longer carrying the suffocating toxic weight of my son's bottomless greed. My blood pressure is perfect. My mind is sharp. I sleep soundly every single night, undisturbed by the anxieties of ungrateful children and their fabricated emergencies. I wake up with a profound sense of purpose, surrounded by genuine allies, and driven by the absolute mission of the Evelyn Cole Foundation. I have weaponized my invisible wealth to become an impenetrable shield for those who cannot fight back against the predators in their own homes. I am richer in spirit, in peace, and in freedom than I have ever been. My legacy is no longer tethered to a cowardly son. It is tethered to justice. I rewrote the ending of my own life, and in doing so, I reclaimed my soul. Now I turn to you, the people who have listened to my journey from the very beginning. What would you have done in my place? Would you have found the strength to fight back in the shadows? Or would the agonizing pain of betrayal have kept you silent? Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity and protect your livelihood? The decision to sever ties with your own flesh and blood is never easy, but sometimes it is the only way to survive and preserve your dignity. I want to hear your thoughts, your struggles, and your own stories of reclaiming your power. Let me know in the comments below. Your voice matters, and sharing your truth might just give someone else the courage they desperately need to stand up to the abusers in their own lives. Thank you for walking this difficult path with me and for understanding that our worth does not diminish with age. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you in the next life story with all my love and respect. Another profound truth I learned is that the loudest displays of wealth are often hiding the deepest desperation. My son and his wife traded their morals to maintain a fragile illusion of success. They were suffocating under the weight of their own vanity. They believed that expensive suits and luxury cars made them powerful while viewing my modest life as a weakness. But true power never needs to shout. True wealth is not what you show to the world, but the quiet security and unshakable integrity you build in the shadows. When you strip away the material greed, all that remains is your character. Please share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that true strength lies in who you are and not what you own.